I was genuinely delighted, since I had been gnawing on exactly how to feed her growth for the long haul, and the answer had simply fallen into my lap. Fire element items being far easier to acquire than raw gems or purple crystals. From now on, I could buy up cheap, low-quality fire element junk, run it through the converter, and produce the purple crystals that fueled her advancement, though I still had to test whether the element gems themselves could feed her. I had nothing element-bearing on hand, or I would have tested the converter on the spot, so I set it aside to move into the core cabin tomorrow with the rest of the things I could not yet use. The last item of the night was another talent orb. Green, useless to me with my slots full, and likely to stay that way for ages. So I decided to gamble it through 100 transformations and see what came out. I was looking forward to it more than I should have, since 100 transformations was the single talent that had carried me this far. The orb transformed into a wood element talent mutation orb, blue, which on use forced a positive mutation in wood element talents with a very small chance of raising quality, effective only on excellent and lower talents. My enthusiasm flattened, because the thing was clearly strong in the right hands. Only those hands were not mine, since I had been quietly hoping for something that could lift talent quality and bump my own 100 transformations toward legendary. Instead, I got a mutation orb loaded with restrictions that did me no good, so I resolved to sell it later, though not for Whitestone, the least valuable thing I owned right now. The proper move was an item-for-item trade aimed at squeezing out something genuinely good, and I figured I would open that trade after the week closed, when the odds of decent offers ran higher. With that, I was done for the night, so I went back to the quiet, profitable rhythm of making ice, draining my mana, fighting arena matches to hold my qualifying spot, and refilling around and around as the sky slowly paled toward morning. The instant the first ray of light crested the horizon, the heat slammed down so hard that even the cooler beside me could barely take the edge off, and within moments sweat had soaked my clothes flat against my skin. There was no working outside in this, so I checked the cooler, spent Whitestone on the parts, and pushed it to its maximum, level 12. Where it could pull the temperature down by 22 degrees, each of the late levels shaving off another 2. That helped a little, but it was still brutal, and I could not linger outdoors for long, which meant fishing was off the table for the commoners today, so I would have them haul seawater inside and make ice within the cabin instead. Right as I was laying out the day's plan, Windsor came over, settled onto the stool beside me, and asked whether I was tired and wanted to rest, while she kept watch. I patted my thigh and waved her over, and she shot me a half-exasperated look but got up anyway, scooped up Huahua, and sat sideways across my lap. She poked my forehead and complained that dragging her over here in this heat could not possibly be comfortable for me. I laughed, kissed her rosy lips, and told her there was nothing to be done, that she was simply too attractive, and a little discomfort was well worth it. She was clearly pleased, but refused to show it, pinching the soft flesh at my waist instead, and rolling her eyes. She said she had known from the first day that I had designs on her, but had not expected me to be quite this shameless. Then she asked, half teasing, whether I wanted her and little sister Darkmoon to serve me together someday. I sighed and said I wished, but Darkmoon would never agree, looking as helpless as I could manage. Watching my completely unrepentant face, Windsor got a little annoyed, turned away and declared that even if Darkmoon agreed, she would not. I understood her far too well, so I turned her face back and kissed her, and she resisted for a heartbeat before melting into it. She breathed that all I knew how to do was bully her, and I told her I had always known she was the best, taking her soft hands in mine. She snorted at me to let go because it was too hot, and feeling a certain unmistakable reaction stirring beneath her, her face flushed deeper still. The long kiss had clearly affected her too, so she got up quickly and stepped away. I did not stop her, only handed her the resource fishing rod and told her to burn through today's 3 pulls now, since it would only get hotter as the day wore on. By the time the sun was fully up, she had used all 3 attempts and turned to hand me the items. I twisted around to take them and froze, because the heat had soaked her dress through until it clung to every line of her figure, and the sight hit me like a wave of thirst. She noticed my stare, reddened, and started to steam her dress dry, but I stopped her, swept her up, and carried her toward the core cabin while she gave a soft cry. Inside the cabin, I was relieved to find Darkmoon absent, since being walked in on would have been genuinely awkward, and I told myself to finish quickly. I set Windsor down, and when she asked with some annoyance what I thought I was doing, I only chuckled since she knew exactly what I wanted and simply could not bring herself to say it. I kissed her and began my exploration, and she gradually warmed to it and answered in kind, and the two of us went back and forth in a lively contest that I, in the end, won, leaving her begging for mercy while I felt thoroughly smug. Afterward, we lay there spent, and she marveled that I had not slept a wink all night, yet still had this much energy left. I stroked her hair and told her she had simply been too charming this morning, and she let out a soft snort that did nothing to hide how pleased the compliment made her. Then she nudged me to get dressed before Darkmoon came back, and with no wish to linger, I washed up and stepped out. Except that when I came out of the cabin, Darkmoon was standing right there at the entrance, and our eyes met, and the moment turned distinctly awkward. I covered it by telling her, as evenly as I could, that after breakfast I would have the ship dive straight away, and that she and Windsor should run the hunt as usual. She felt the discomfort too, but held her cool composure and answered that she understood. Lord, seeing her retreat into that formality stirred something in me, so I beckoned her closer. When she stepped up looking faintly confused, I leaned in, kissed her on the cheek and told her smiling that from now on she should call me Ha-Shin the way Windsor did, no more Lord. It was far too stiff. Then I left to go arrange the day. Behind me, Dark Moon stood frozen by the unexpected kiss until my back had already disappeared, her fair cheeks flushing hot, and only after a moment did she go back inside to find Windsor lounging across the bed grinning at her, which I imagine made the whole thing worse. Out on the deck, the heat hit like stepping into a furnace, and I told the commoners still sweating through their work in the fishing corridor that there would be no fishing today and they could return to their rooms. They were plainly relieved, since the heat had them on the edge of heat stroke. But I asked a few to stay behind, haul seawater up, and bring it to my cabin so I could keep making ice. Then I fashioned a handful of wooden buckets in a large basin and handed them out. After that, I collected Hwawa and carried her back to the core cabin. Ignoring the playful Windsor and Dark Moon, I gathered up yesterday's earnings from the money tree and opened the technology panel. The next ship level wanted 20,000 white stone and was out of reach for a while, which made it the right time to develop technologies instead. I tried lighting up the single-screw propulsion technology, and the system again refused, telling me the conditions were not met, so that one evidently waited on the third stage, leaving me to keep upgrading the multi-ore line. Pushing it from level 3 to level 4 cost 4,000 white stone, and I paid without hesitation, because a faster ship meant reaching my destination and planting a territory sooner, which mattered more than nearly anything else. Then I opened the diving technology, sitting at level 2, where level 3 demanded a full 6,000 white stone. After last night's selling, I had the white stone to spare, and I went ahead with the dive upgrade too, since deeper diving meant longer hunts, which leveled the crew and brought in more white stone besides. Once both cleared, I noticed my reserves had cratered to barely over 1,000, the kind of number that makes a merchant wince. Right then Mori came in to announce breakfast, so I went to eat, and during the meal I used the seawater the commoners had carried up to make one more batch of ice. When I finished, I had the ship dive and start the day's hunt, leaving Windsor and the others responsible while I stayed in the cabin grinding ice. And after my mana ran out, I sat down to appraise the 3 items Windsor had pulled today. The first was a blue Aratan armor construction blueprint, green, which let a blacksmith learn to forge the armor and raise my army's combat power. I lifted an eyebrow, since that counted as a good item, though I stored it for after my territory existed, given that I did not even have the blacksmith yet. The second was a bag holding spirit rice seeds, green, which after planting yielded spirit rice that better replenished the body's energy. And green seeds were always worth having, more than enough for a territory's early days even if there were not many. The last was a lounge chair manufacturing blueprint, white, a comfortable chair costing only 4 wood and 10 iron nails. And I was thoroughly let down, since it carried no real value. Still, I built it on the spot so Windsor and the others would have somewhere to lie around. With that handled, I went back to making ice and stepping into the arena whenever my mana emptied. After fighting non-stop all last night, I had finally cracked the top 10,000, but I could not afford to stop, since everyone else was grinding just as frantically and would shove me back out fast if I let up. While I made ice and fought though, Windsor and the others ran into a bit of trouble out on the hunt. Out under the sea, Windsor had everything running normally, with Lee Rook piloting and Little Blue scouting the surroundings, and it stayed calm right up until they crossed paths with a shark, 12 meters long, blue-skinned, marked with purple-black patterns, and a single black horn jutting from its head. Windsor had no appraisal skill and could not read the creature's exact strength, but when one blow from it left Little Blue badly hurt, she understood the thing was not to be taken lightly. She ordered the rest of the commoners to fall back to avoid pointless casualties, then she and Hwawa moved to deal with it, while Dark Moon, whose strength dropped during the day, was left to watch over the commoners. Windsor laid a light shield on herself and on Hwawa, sent a light rope at the shark, and Hwawa followed with firebinding, but fighting in the sea blunted Hwawa's power considerably. The shark fired a black arrow from its horn that shattered the light rope, twisted aside from the firebinding, and without slowing, lunged straight for the tower ship where Windsor stood. Right then Windsor's light arrow and Hwawa's fireball both struck home, and though the shark slipped the arrow, the fireball caught it. The fireball did not do much real damage, but it dragged the shark's speed down out of that first furious rush, and Windsor seized the opening to land a light rope that bound it, slashing its movement, after which Hwawa stacked another firebinding to tighten the control. Watching the creature thrash, yet still strain toward the tower ship, Windsor's eyes went cold, because she could not let it reach the hull, so she hit it with a bewilder skill and poured light arrows into it alongside Hwawa's fireballs. The shark shrieked, its body pocked with blood holes and seared with burns, then suddenly went still, the patterns along its skin flickering with pale light from the tail forward until everything gathered at its head. A purplish black orb began forming on the black horn, arcs of electricity crackling through the seawater around it, and Windsor's expression shifted because that attack looked nasty and she doubted she could block it alone. She called for Manhwa to cast Fire Shield, and Manhwa, understanding the danger, layered 2 on her in quick succession while Windsor stacked 2 light shields of her own. When the orb launched, Windsor first threw a light arrow to intercept it, but the arrow shattered on contact, and the orb tore past Manhwa's fireball. The purplish-black orb did not aim for Windsor or Manhwa, but drove straight at the tower ship, since the shark had grasped that wrecking the vessel would leave the 2 of them easy prey. Windsor was never going to allow that because a damaged ship meant their whole journey would suffer even if no one died. So she took a deep breath, leapt off the tower ship, and met the attack head-on, and the orb smashed through her shields one after another. And when Manhwa flung up one more fire shield, it broke the instant it formed. The orb slammed into Windsor's body, hurled her against the outer hull with a heavy impact, and she coughed up blood, her body covered in wounds, then cast a healing spell on herself and turned back to the shark. The attack had clearly drained the creature, and seeing that its gamble had failed, it roared louder, though now there was real fear threaded through the sound, because it understood it was facing death. Windsor was not about to grant it any reprieve, so she unleashed light arrows, and Manhwa, furious over Windsor's injury, hurled fireballs even harder than before. Then something astonishing happened. Manhwa's whole body transformed in her rage, swelling until she stood the height of a young girl, her form sheathed in red and gold mark armor, fiery hair streaming, a golden flame pattern blazing on her forehead. Even her fireballs changed, no longer small red ones but far larger golden spheres, and when her golden fireball struck the shark, it snapped the black horn clean off, kept right on going, and punched a bloody hole through the creature's skull, killing it outright. Windsor was stunned by the sight, and a moment later she watched Manhwa shrink back down and drop onto the deck, so she abandoned the shark's loot and rushed over in alarm. Manhwa's hair had dimmed, but her chest still rose and fell gently, which let Windsor breathe again, since it seemed to be nothing more than exhaustion. She gathered the little one up, and though she did not understand what had just happened, she was deeply moved, because she knew the transformation had been triggered by her own injury, and her gaze softened as she looked at Manhwa. Dark Moon arrived just then, asking with worry whether Windsor was all right, and Windsor said she had taken no serious harm, since after passing through 5 shields the orb's force had not actually been that great, and the healing had her mostly mended. She told Dark Moon to go retrieve the shark's drop and make sure no further accidents happened, and Dark Moon nodded, leapt off the tower ship, and went after the item. Windsor cast healing on Manhwa, who was not wounded but could still be soothed by it. Then she walked to the bow and stroked Little Blue's head, because without that timely interception the tower ship would surely have taken damage, and seeing the wounds across the whale's body, she quickly healed those too. Lee Rook came up, bowed slightly, and asked what they should do next, and Windsor told him to hold position for now, that they needed to rest and recover, and he answered that he understood. Lord. The group rested aboard until they had mostly recovered before moving on, and the rest of the dive passed quietly without incident. When the time came to surface, Lee Rook piloted the ship up and out of the water, and Windsor carried Manhwa with Dark Moon beside her into the core cabin. She found me sitting on the sofa with my eyes shut, and understood I was in the arena, so she settled by the bed with Manhwa and spoke quietly with Dark Moon rather than disturb me. When I opened my eyes and noticed them, I asked whether everything had gone smoothly, mostly out of routine, since nothing unusual had come up lately and I was not paying close attention. As it turned out, something genuinely unexpected had happened this time, because Windsor said they had run into a fairly strong sea beast and hit a small snag. I asked, with some concern, whether she was badly hurt, and she said no serious injuries, so I asked what exactly had happened. She recounted the whole encounter, and when she reached the part about Manhwa undergoing a huge transformation because she herself had been injured, she looked down at Manhwa in her arms with open tenderness. I was genuinely surprised to hear of a special change like that, so I checked Manhwa's information and confirmed it. Her readout now showed her as a fire elemental spirit in an evolving state, legendary, level 6. Her stats sitting in the low 40s across strength, agility, defense, and wisdom. Her mana over 400. Her profession listed as hero, fire element controller, with a new line reading Fire Martial God Awakening, and her skills now ran Fireball Blazing Body marked as advancing, Fire Binding and Fire Shield, her loyalty and affinity both at 100. First, her spirit being flagged as evolving told me Manhwa had begun developing to a deeper level, and that new Fire Martial God Awakening line made me suspect that once she finished, she might become a Fire Martial God rather than a simple elemental spirit. Second, her blazing body skill showing as advancing was almost certainly the cause of her body's enormous shift, since I had always been puzzled by that skill, thinking it did little more than act as a power bank, when in fact it carried enormous potential. Beyond being triggered by an external shock, I guessed her awakening had also been quietly fed by how constantly I had her use the skill. I had never expected such an offhand habit to pay off this richly, and though I had no idea what she would look like fully evolved, I was looking forward to it. I asked whether she could change forms at will now, and Manhwa nodded, then shook her head, humming and squirming and clearly frustrated that she could not speak. Reading her, I guessed aloud that she could transform but could not control it, that it came down to chance, and her eyes lit up as she nodded hard, confirming exactly that. It seemed this was the in-between state of an incomplete awakening, where she could only shift forms by luck until she fully awakened, and there was no telling how long that would take. My guess was that beyond drilling blazing body, she would also need a steady supply of energy, which frustrated me since I still had nothing fire element on hand, so for now I could only let nature run its course and have her practice. After I told her to keep training, Manhwa flew out of Windsor's arms, came to me first and kissed my cheek, then clenched her tiny fists, puffed out her cheeks, and put on the most determined expression she could manage. I laughed and ruffled her hair, asking whether she meant she would work hard, and she nodded seriously, then flapped her wings and flew out toward the deck to drill her blazing body, leaving me a little speechless that my offhand encouragement had fired her up this much. Windsor gave me a look, and I just spread my hands to show I was as innocent as anyone. With my mana recovered, I went back to making ice and listing it the moment it was done. And once my mana emptied again, I pulled out the items Windsor had hunted today to appraise. The first was a card, a small gem ore vein resource card, green, which on use spawned a small gem ore vein in my territory, and the appraisal cheerfully noted that gems were a precious resource and my luck was good. I was delighted, since gems were exactly the bottleneck my profession temple had revealed, and I now understood just how scarce they were, though I had no idea yet how much a small vein would actually produce. The second item was a blacksmith shop construction blueprint, green, which let me build a shop where blacksmiths could forge weapons to arm my troops, requiring wood, iron blocks, and 5 fire element gem. And it caught me off guard that even this needed fire gems. It was a shame the shop was only green, since higher quality would have served me better. I did not dare feed something this important through 100 transformations, given how random the talent still was, and how badly I would regret losing the blueprint, which left me wishing again for a talent quality enhancement orb to tame that randomness. The third was a healing potion recipe, green, which taught the alchemist profession to refine healing potions and would cut casualties among my troops. The first potion recipe I had ever drawn, a genuinely good item that I stored away. The fourth was a radiator manufacturing blueprint, white, for producing radiators that gave warmth in cold weather. And my face fell, because in this furnace of a heat, what earthly use did that have? I honestly wanted to swear, since pulling a heater in weather like this felt like Chianmo going out of her way to torment me. The last item was the one dropped by the shark itself, which I had deliberately saved for last in the hope it would not let me down. I checked it and found an alchemist summoning card, purple, which on use summoned an alchemist, a profession that could brew all manner of potions and even modify my troops, making it indispensable to a territory. I was ecstatic, because even half prepared, seeing purple quality still rattled me, since to me right now purple items were practically gold. Being a summoning card, it carried a higher chance by past experience of transforming into a related item, so I let myself hope it might become another hero summoning card. I put it away to handle tonight and spent the rest of the day cycling between the arena and ice. When evening came and dinner was done, while my mana refilled, I opened the chat channel and found, to my mild irritation, that they were talking about me. Someone asked the brothers what was going on with the great Ha-Shin, since he was not even in the top 100, and another guessed I simply did not intend to join the 2-domain competition. A third sneered that my strength must be lacking, pointing out that Hagawa Hina and Lee Kyo both sat in the top 10 for survival points and the top 10 for arena points alike. Some doubted me outright, with one repeating that I had only been lucky, that my survival points led purely by chance and my real strength was nothing, a line that came straight from Hagawa Hina. But someone who had met me in the arena fired back that he flat out did not believe it, since I had killed him in a single move. Others noted my survival points still led by a wide margin, so most of the channel held that my strength was high, even if a handful clung to Hagawa Hina's view, which the empty leaderboard slot kept feeding. Then Lee Kyo spoke up to say my strength was not weak, that I was simply too busy to grind for ranking. I was not much surprised by her, since she was always so forward, but I was surprised when Baek Seol stepped in to back me too. The two of them defending me dropped a boulder into the lake, and the ripples lit the whole channel. Players marveled that 2 top 10 beauties had come out for me, speculated about my relationships with them, and spun increasingly lurid little dramas about Lee Kyo, Baek Seol, and me, until the discussion went so far off the rails that I closed the channel with a face full of black lines. The mention of survival points reminded me I had not looked at that list in ages, since I was so reliably first that I had stopped checking, but the results posted tomorrow, so I pulled it up and found some movement. I held first with 2,760 points, Baek Seol second with 1,320, Lee Kyo third with 10,210, Danton and Ye Baek Pung tied at 1,111, Hagawa Hina sixth with 1,098, and James seventh with 1,097. Lee Kyo had climbed past Danton into third, and 7 of the top 10 had crossed 1,000, which meant they were not far from upgrading their tower ships. My lead was enormous, nearly double Baek Seol's second place score, and short of some massive stroke of luck, none of them could catch me. I had no intention of handing them the chance, since joining the two-domain competition tomorrow would let me cash in on my own strength and pull even further ahead. I understood this world plainly enough, that barring accidents it ran on the strong getting stronger, so I closed the list and kept making ice, figuring sales would dry up soon, since only a few hours remained until the 6th day, and some players would tough out the rest rather than waste white stone. Sure enough, as midnight neared, the cubes stopped selling, so I stopped making them, sent the last water-hauling commoners off to rest for good, and sat down on the sofa for the night's 100 transformations. The first was a luxury quilt crafting blueprint, green, pulled from Wang Mok's trade list, which made warm, comfortable quilts for the cold winter. Looking at that quilt blueprint, I could not help thinking of the radiator blueprint I had drawn earlier, and a suspicion sharpened that next week's disaster might involve severe cold. So I went to the trading channel and searched the words heat and cotton, and the results came back thick: radiator blueprints, heat panels, quilt blueprints, cotton clothing blueprints, heated blankets, all listed cheap because the present heat made everyone think them worthless. My eyes lit up, since this all but confirmed my prediction, and I realized I could ride the hunch into a fortune later. Though there was a real risk, because if more cold resistance items kept releasing, stockpiling now could leave me holding losses. Then again, a loss was only a loss. In worst case, I would keep the goods and use them after founding my territory, tying up only a slice of funds for a while. So I checked my white stone, a little over 10,000, kept 2,000 back, and spent the remaining 8,000 and change buying the market out. I picked up some radiator blueprints, heat panels, and heated blankets for my own use, then bought quilt blueprints, cotton clothing blueprints, cloth and cotton batting in bulk, since the prices ran low now and would surely climb the moment the weather turned. I stored everything in the warehouse because the spatial grid simply could not hold that much. Then fed the luxury quilt blueprint through 100 transformations, and out came another blueprint, which made me laugh under my breath. It was a multifunctional bedding crafting blueprint blue, which crafted a multifunctional bedding set and demanded a fair pile more materials than the last one: cloth, cotton, copper block, plastic, and electronic component. I crafted it directly, and 2 quilts appeared, moon white fabric embroidered with blue patterns, a small plug in one corner, and a little remote control with a temperature button that adjusted up and down. I grumbled that it was barely multifunction, since it was just temperature control. Worse, the thing clearly needed charging and I had no power source, which set me thinking that if next week truly turned cold, all my heated blankets and panels would need electricity too, so the power problem was something I had to solve. I filed that away and took out a rare spirit treasure, an Earth origin child ginseng, a blue quality spirit fruit for raising attributes, and since I had no urgent need for it tonight and few other good items on hand, I decided to gamble it through 100 transformations for a possible surprise. What appeared was a small jade box, palm-sized, and I read the appraisal in confusion. The box held an Earth origin mother ginseng seed, purple, which once planted cultivated the mother plant itself, a precious rare spirit treasure. I burst out cursing with excitement, because I had actually drawn the seed of a spirit treasure, genuinely valuable. I did not yet know whether a mother ginseng would keep producing child ginseng over time, but if it did, my territory could permanently hold its own supply, which was true foundational strength. If other spirit treasures could likewise yield their seeds through 100 transformations, I could one day grow an entire garden of them, and just imagining it had my blood up. So I resolved to test the idea whenever the chance came. I put the seed away and took out the alchemist summoning card, really hoping for gold quality this time, and triggered the talent. It became an elemental spirit pet card, golden, with a flat little description saying it summoned an elemental spirit on use, and I felt a flicker of disappointment, since I had been angling for a hero summoning card, heroes being more useful than pets. Then again, after watching Huawa's mutation today, I had to admit elemental spirits carried real potential too, even if they had to be turned into heroes to fully unleash it, so I did not hesitate and used the card straight away. A flash of golden light swept the cabin. Windsor and Dark Moon both turned to look, and a small sprite appeared before me. She was already the same size as Huawa rather than tiny the way Huawa had started, which had to be her golden quality showing, since Huawa had been summoned in mere purple. I studied her carefully, taking in the small golden dress, the little staff in her hand, the golden hair just brushing her shoulders, the golden pupils, and the faintly sharp cast to her little face. After a moment's thought, I named her Ha Rui, choosing a sound that meant sharp and keen, fitting for that edge in her features. I noted privately that Huawa would need a formal name eventually too, since calling a future martial god by a pet nickname would only embarrass her prestige. The little sprite happily darted to my side and rubbed her face against my cheek, so I held her and checked her information. She came up as a gold elemental spirit, golden, level 5, with strength 46, agility 45, and defense 47. Her skills reading hardened gold body, golden shield, sharp arrow technique, golden cage technique, and golden rain. Her loyalty and affinity both at 100. On raw stats alone, she edged out the level 6 Huawa, which made sense since Huawa had begun at purple with much lower innate numbers, and even after eating several spirit treasures still trailed her. so I took out one of each remaining rare spirit treasure and had Harui consume them. The Spirit Origin Gold Fruit, Spirit Origin Purple Grape, and Spirit Origin Blue Vine, 3 green quality fruits, raised Harui's attributes by a total of 10, 4 into strength, 2 into agility, and 4 into defense. I had meant to take her up to the deck and test her skills before the 2-domain competition opened, since fighting blind to my own side's abilities would make sound decisions hard, but one thought of the furnace outside killed the idea, and I decided morning would do just as well. So I sent Harui off to rest in the small room where the ice cubes used to sit, and went back inside, undressed, and got into bed, lying this time directly between Windsor and Dark Moon, an arm around each of the pajama-clad girls. Under their shy looks, I kissed them both, told them we would rest early tonight, and made no further moves, instead stepping into the arena to play matches, because I did not want to get squeezed out of the top 10,000 at the very end, which would have been a tragedy. After midnight passed, I found I could no longer start a match. Checked my ranking, and saw I sat over 7,000 with more than 3,000 points, which was not bad and proved I had won over 3,000 matches across this whole stretch. Then Shanmo's announcement sounded again. She declared that this arena competition had ended, that the top 10,000 were settled, and that we should rest and recover before joining the 2-domain competition tomorrow. She added a reminder to exchange our points quickly, since the arena would close in 1 hour and the next opening time was uncertain. The news surprised me, since I had assumed the arena would stay open forever, not shut down after a single week, so I stopped dawdling and started exchanging, though with only 3,000 points I had no idea what I could afford. Glancing at the top 10, I saw they all carried well over 10,000 points, Baxiel foremost with nearly 30,000. Yet I felt not the slightest pang of regret, because the white stone I had earned across that same week was worth far more to me than any pile of arena points. Points buy trinkets, but cash builds an empire, and I knew exactly which one I was here for. 3,000 points went fast once I started spending them. I exchanged for the things a territory cannot exist without, beginning with the Shield Warrior Troop Nest, a green item that summons the heavy frontline bodies that soak punishment so the squishier ranks behind them can keep firing. Then the Healer Troop Nest, a blue one, because an army that can heal mid-fight simply outlasts one that cannot. The third was the Residential Building Blueprint, plain white, so basic that a territory without it is just a campsite. I bought 50 blueprints at 10 points each. 3 Shield Warrior Troop Nests at 200 apiece, and 3 Healer Troop Nests at 600, 2,900 points before I'd even thought about food. With the leftover change, I picked up a scatter of vegetable and grain seeds, then closed out of the arena. When I opened my eyes back in my own body, I found Windsor and Dark Moon both asleep against me, each with one leg slung over mine like I was furniture. I almost laughed, but I didn't move. I hadn't slept at all the night before, between the ice work and the fighting, and exhaustion had soaked all the way into my bones, so I just let my eyes fall shut and went under right there, pinned in place and not minding it. The next thing I knew, a hand was shaking my shoulder, and when I dragged my eyes open, Windsor was leaning over me, telling me softly it was time to eat. 2 straight days of making ice or killing things had hollowed me out, and even awake my head felt stuffed with wool. I rubbed my eyes, shook the fog loose, and once I was reasonably sure I was functioning again, I told her to go ahead without me and that I'd be along shortly. I got up, washed, and came to the table to find Windsor, Dark Moon, and Mori already sitting there, Mori having moved into one of the other bedrooms so she ate with us as a matter of course. Breakfast was white porridge, steamed buns, and a pair of light stir-fried dishes, exactly what I'd asked for, since heavy food in the morning has always sat wrong. Huawa and Harui were nowhere in sight, almost certainly off playing somewhere on deck. While I ate, a notification blinked up on my friends list, and when I opened it I found Li Kyo, who skipped any greeting and went straight to telling me not to forget our agreement. I could picture her on the other end, lying on her bed with a glass of something non-alcoholic, since nobody sane was drinking the day before the 2 domains competition. I told her I had no intention of breaking my word, and only after she read that did the worry drain out of her enough to close the channel and go deal with her own preparations. On my side, I'd handed the navigator Li Roop the job of managing the commoners during the fight, and told them all to take up bows. I understood perfectly well that sea battles run on ranged fire, but I wasn't counting on these civilians to win anything for me. My only instruction was that they stay alive, because a territory with no residents is just an expensive boat, and the real killing this time would be done by Windsor, Huawa, and Harui. Even Dark Moon wasn't suited for an open brawl, so my plan was for her to stay folded into my shadow as a reserve. The knife I'd draw only when someone forced my hand. With the arrangement settled, I started my daily resource fishing. Windsor had pulled the line the last 2 days, and now I wanted to test my own luck. The first thing that surfaced was a bridge construction blueprint, a green item that builds a bridge at a chosen spot to better connect a territory, at a cost of 500 stone. I couldn't decide whether it was useful or clutter, so I set it aside to feed into 100 transformations that night, and let the system roll it into something better. The second pull was a luxury bathing set, also green, which promised to lift my mood with an actual bath, and that one I genuinely wanted, since lately I'd been boiling water by hand and wiping myself down like a man living in a tent. A real bathtub with an automatic heater sounded close to luxury, except it needed a power source and a great deal of fresh water, and I couldn't bathe in seawater. I made a note to solve the power problem and upgrade the seawater converter, then frowned because spending pure water on a bath felt wasteful enough that I half wanted to feed this into 100 transformations too. The third item appeared while I was still arguing with myself, so I called the 2 commoners over to haul the first 2 pieces into the storeroom and looked at what was left in my hands. It was a cloth bag, and the description told me it held element gems, a special mineral good for construction and, more interestingly, for strengthening certain special beings. I burst out laughing, because that second use was exactly what I needed. I tore the bag open and counted 35 fire element gems, 26 gold element gems, 12 water element gems, and I decided on the spot that this one bag was worth more to me than the bathtub and the bridge put together. I went looking for Hwawa and found her at the stern, drilling her blazing body while Harui sat perched on the railing watching with the patience of a much older creature. The moment they saw me, both launched off and came to roost on my shoulders, and when I drew out the fire and gold gems, their eyes lit up like I'd offered them candy. That reaction told me everything. It wasn't only spirit crystal and purple crystal that fed an elemental's growth. Gems did the job too, and that opened a whole new supply line in my head. I handed them 1 gem each, both no bigger than a thumb pad, and watched them eat in their wildly different ways. Hwawa breathed a thread of flame, melted the red gem to slag, and drank the molten light straight in. Harui was rougher, her small pale hand flushing gold as she crushed the gem to powder in one squeeze, then licked the golden dust off her palm with a tiny tongue, thoroughly pleased with herself. I pocketed the rest and decided to save them until after the competition, because if they gorged now, they'd have to digest, and a pet busy digesting in the middle of a war fight's at half strength. With that done, I told Hwawa to keep grinding blazing body and set Harui to working her hardened gold body, since I'd half decided to convert her into a hero eventually, and toughening her physique now might push her closer to an evolution. Ever since Harui came to me, a quiet ambition had been taking shape, to gather every type of elemental spirit I could find, and raise each to evolve, because something in my gut insisted the payoff would be enormous. I knew it was a long road, an absurdly difficult one, but I felt no rush, the kind of project a person chips away at for years whenever the chance appears. So I spent the rest of that stretch on the stern watching my 2 little spirits train, until the goddess broke the calm with a global announcement. The system's voice rolled out across the whole world. The 2 domains competition was about to begin, and participants should ready themselves. It would run as a 2 armies confrontation, with starting positions assigned by rank, the higher-ranked lords placed further forward. Killing demon domain novice lords would grant merit points. The whole thing would end once participants dropped to 40%, and it would start in 5 minutes, with Chanmo wishing everyone a victorious opening. I picked the announcements apart one at a time while the count ran down. The first line told me nothing useful. The second mattered because it implied my own position would land somewhere far back, which for most people would be a blessing, since the rear is the safe place to be. For me, it was the opposite of what I wanted. Further back meant fewer kills, fewer ship cores, and I badly needed ship cores to grow my fleet, so my only hope was that my teleport binding with Lee Kyo keyed off her position instead of mine, and dragged me up to the front row with her. There are always trade-offs. I hadn't ground the arena for points and white stone, and now I'd lost my forward slot, the bill simply coming due. The third line reminded me I'd earned merit points, the same currency I'd seen last time I crossed into the demon domain. Except that thanks to a long talk with the Jimson mountain turtle, I now grasped how valuable they really were. Inside Cheonmo City, merit points buy things Whitestone can't touch, so this run I intended an outright killing spree, harvesting demon domain lords for ship cores and merit both. The fourth line was the cruelest. An ending threshold of 40% meant that, on average, 6 in 10 people on both sides were going to die, somewhere around 6,000 corpses, and I knew that number would scare many qualified lords into staying home, which the system permitted, since Chiano never forced anyone through the gate. I opened the chat channel, and the wall of reactions was exactly what I expected. People called it a slaughter, a butchering. Somebody complained they'd assumed it would be a search and hunt format like before instead of a head-on collision. A few announced they were folding, declaring it too dangerous, and the bolder ones jeered at them for cowards, and chanted that fortune favors the brave, that whoever survived this would come out rich. In the end, most chose to go in anyway, because the 10,000 who'd clawed their way this far were the ambitious ones, the killers, and they weren't about to flinch now. I took out the binding rope Lee Kyo had given me, tied it to my wrist, and settled in to wait for the teleport, while I used the leftover minutes to check the strength of my own side, which I hadn't reviewed in days. Windsor read back as a legendary hero, a light element messenger now at level 7, with strength in the 60s once her bonus is stacked, agility and defense up there with it, wisdom holding at 60, and a mana pool past 600. Her skills covered healing, light arrow, light shield, plus the blue-grade entangling spell and bewilder, and she carried the purple scepter of light and a green hairpin. Her loyalty sat at a flat 100 and her affinity at 98, the kind that reads as open admiration. The detail that made me sit up was her attribute growth, 10 points this level instead of the usual 5, and the meaning wasn't subtle. If higher quality units start growing twice as fast at a certain threshold, the gap between a legendary and a lesser hero stops being a gap and becomes a canyon, and I genuinely didn't know whether the growth would double again at the general stage. If it did, the math at the top of the ladder was going to get terrifying. Dark Moon checked in as a level 5 legendary hero, a Night Hunter, with attributes noticeably padded by the rare spirit treasure she'd consumed, enough that a level 5 Dark Moon already matched what a normal legendary wouldn't reach until level 6. Her kit ran Darkness Blade, Darkness Erosion, Moon Shadow, and the Blue-Grade Shadow Stealth and Flying Sword technique. With a green Shadow Blade in hand, loyalty at 100 and affinity at 75, which the system labeled close. I noted, the way a merchant notes a depreciating asset, that the treasure boost looked huge now but would shrink to a rounding error once her base numbers climbed, since 1 or 2 herbs mean a lot at level 5 and almost nothing at level 15. Little Blue rounded out the readout as a level 7 deep-sea giant whale, 30 meters of purple-grade muscle, carrying Impact Bite, Thunder Sword, and a freshly awakened giant wave. Pets, it seemed, just grow their own skills as they level, which made me wonder whether Huahua would keep awakening abilities on her own after I turned her into a hero. Though since she could still evolve unassisted, she'd probably keep learning too, and only her next level up would prove it. I ran a quick eye over the commoners and found most had hit level 5 from fishing every single day, which suited me fine. Then my ship began to change color, shifting to white shot through with blue patterns, and a spatial gate opened ahead. I gave the order without hesitating. Little Blue slid forward to take point, the tower ship following close in its wake, and my vision blacked out, blazed white, and left my mind swimming. When I came back to myself, I stood inside the 2 domains competition arena, and the first thing in front of me was a transparent light barrier, with rank upon rank of black ships bearing red patterns behind it, so densely packed they stretched past where I could see. The ships at the very front were level 6 wooden craft. I was still taking the measure of it all when a startled shout cut across the water, somebody crying out that I was completely unfair. I turned my head and found Lee Kyo on her own wooden boat, gawking at me with her eyes stretched wide. I smiled and told her I genuinely owed her thanks this time, that I was riding her coattails up to the front, and never would have landed such a good spot otherwise, which was the plain truth, since without her item I'd be stuck in the rear watching my profits shrink. Her eyes went sly, and she darted them around before proposing, with theatrical sweetness, that we just split the gains from any demon domain lord we killed together right down the middle. I smiled back and told her I wouldn't let her lose out, a deliberately empty thing to say, because of course I wasn't agreeing to an even split. I'd already counted the heads on her deck, and while she had more bodies than I did, they were plainly far weaker, so an equal share would have been a losing trade. When the time came, I'd hand her something I didn't care about and call the favor repaid. Lee Kyo pouted at my non-answer, since she'd known I wouldn't take the even split but had at least expected some gesture, not a polished useless sentence. Then she huffed and asked, with the bluntness of real envy, how I'd managed to stack up so many high-quality characters, half accusing me of cheating. Anyone who just laid eyes on a tower ship, 2 legendary heroes, and a golden pet would have asked the same. And the funny part was that I was still hiding the better half of my hand, with Little Blue lurking on the seabed and Dark Moon tucked into my shadow. I gave her an irritated look and told her there was no way to cheat with the goddess watching everything, that I was simply luckier than most, and that last part I meant. It had started as a single wooden plank, and only because misfortune had hidden a fortune inside it, only because the goddess's compensation had landed in my hands, was I standing where I stood now. Lee Kyo believed me well enough. The question had only been her way of letting off a little of the imbalance churning in her chest. Right then, a second wooden boat blinked into place beside Lee Kyo, another level 6 craft, and both of us looked over at once. Lee Kyo greeted the newcomer as Baek Seol and ribbed her for being slow, and Baek Seol said something had come up and held her back. Then Lee Kyo turned to me with an exaggeratedly pitiful expression and asked whether I minded that she'd brought in another ally without clearing it with me. I did mind, because she'd acted on her own and quietly cast herself as the leader of our little group, and that needled me more than I let show. But things were already set. The urgent business was killing demon domain lords for profit, and everything else could wait until the war was over. I decided privately that if I ever worked with Lee Kyo again, I'd keep a card hidden in my sleeve, because the girl was not an honest operator. Out loud, I just smiled and said, one more person was. One more pair of hands, and I watched the unease flicker across her face, because if I'd snapped at her, she'd have felt forgiven, whereas a calm non-reaction told her the splinter was lodged deep, the kind that quietly sours future cooperation. Lee Kyo couldn't address any of that now, so she swallowed it and invited me onto her boat to meet Baek Seol properly. I judged the real start wouldn't come until the barrier dropped, so I took Huahua and crossed the plank she'd laid between the holes. I went for 2 reasons. The first was that I trusted Lee Kyo not to attack me while our interests were chained together, and the second, the one that mattered, was that Dark Moon rode in my shadow the whole way. On the far deck, I settled onto a wooden stool, glanced at the spread of fruit and snacks on the table, and touched none of it. Lee Kyo introduced Baek Seol as a friend she knew well and trusted, and I took the woman's measure, finding a girl in a white dress with long black hair, who carried herself with a stubborn, determined air, the look of someone hard to break. Lee Kyo said my name needed no introduction, and Baek Seol smiled and called me the pride of the Joe Kingdom, before offering her hand and hoping aloud for chances to work together. Her warmth surprised me a little, but I shook her hand briefly and let go. And when I caught the faint surprise in her eyes, I understood it. A small note of approval that I hadn't held the grip a beat too long or tried to take advantage. I was quietly amused. Of course I hadn't, when I already had Windsor and Dark Moon, and even otherwise I wasn't about to tangle myself up with a fellow lord, since the relationship there began and ended at cooperation. Lee Kyo decided we should all lay our cards on the table, and went first, naming her profession as archer and her talent as Eagle Eye, which let her lock onto a target more cleanly before introducing her epic shield warrior hero, Guru. Baek Seol followed by calling herself a wood element messenger who could control plants, with the talent wood element affinity, which doubled the results of her wood type skills for the same effort. She added the catch, that fighting at sea blunted her strength badly and left her only 2 usable skills, wood shield technique and wood arrow technique, then mentioned almost in passing that her hero was a legendary grade berserker at level 5, whose entire kit was close combat. That caught me off guard. I hadn't expected her to be sitting on a legendary hero, and a berserker at that, which dragged my mind straight back to Jaseni, the berserker I'd faced in the arena, a man who'd left a deep enough mark that the word alone put me on alert. I didn't take their introductions at face value naturally since everyone keeps trump cards, but when their eyes swung to me expecting my own accounting, I gave them one. I told them I had 2 heroes, a light element messenger and a fire elemental spirit, both legendary, then added 2 pets, a legendary gold elemental spirit and an epic deep-sea giant whale. Since I'd stopped thinking of Hwawa as a pet the moment she became a hero, I kept Dark Moon entirely off the ledger, because a man always holds something back. Even so, the 2 of them were openly stunned, because 3 legendary subordinates put me in a different category from them altogether, the distance between heaven and earth. I added that the rest of my people were just commoners, and Lee Kyo stared at me with the full envious, can't quite stand it look of someone whose internal scales had tipped right over. Baek Seol nodded along, equally rattled, since she'd sat at second place to my first this whole time while privately assuming the gap was luck, that our actual strength ran close. Only now did it land that she couldn't beat even my subordinates, and being competitive she pushed back and asked how strong they really were, since quality is only half of it, and level the other half. Lee Kyo's eyes lit up too, both desperate for a crack of daylight against the wall I represented. I gave them none. I told them flatly that one legendary hero was level 7, one level 6, the legendary pet level 5, and the epic level 7, and the 2 went slack-jawed. Lee Kyo blurted that it was impossible, that there was no way I'd leveled so fast. Since she'd worked her people to the bone fishing and hunted personally and only barely scraped to level 6, I shrugged it off, said I'd unlocked a diving technology and hunted in the sea every day, so the leveling ran a touch quicker. And the way they looked at me afterward, like some kind of monster, started to get genuinely uncomfortable. When Baek Seol pressed reluctantly about my own strength, I told her the truth, that I was only level 5 myself, an ice element messenger, and the relief on both their faces was almost comic until confusion replaced it. If my subordinates were that strong, why was I crawling along at level 5? I asked Lee Kyo whether she knew the attribute gain from leveling scales with talent quality, and when they nodded it clicked at once that I was holding my level down on purpose, waiting for my quality to rise so each level would pay out more. They'd clearly wanted to ask whether I wasn't afraid of dying while under-leveled, but one more glance at my roster strangled the question. Because with subordinates like mine there's no need to rush. The muscle is right there if danger comes. I sat watching the 2 of them deflate under the weight of my introduction, privately smug and more than a little entertained. While we'd been talking, the field had been filling in, and when I looked around I noticed something off, and stood up, frowning. Most of the ships arriving now were level 3 or 4, some even level 2, which made no sense among the supposed top 10,000. I'd expected the formation sorted by rank, the way the announcement promised, with the top 10 and their level 5 and 6 ships clustered around me. Lee Kyo and Baek Seol saw me rise and asked what was wrong. So I laid out the puzzle, and after they chewed on it, Baek Seol offered the only explanation that fit. The top 10 of us had each been teleported in separately, everyone leading a team, and the 3 of us had only bunched together because of Lee Kyo's binding item. I agreed, and a small regret pricked at me, because I'd half hoped to run into Hagawahina here and quietly remove him, just to stop his endless chattering in the chat channel from grating on me. Since the formation made that impossible at the start, I filed it away, since as a team leader myself there'd be a decent chance of crossing him once the lines tangled, and when that happened I'd give him a quick ending. I turned us to dividing spoils. Lee Kyo's position was that whoever killed the Lord took the loot, and Baekseol's was that we should simply cover one another so nobody got ganged up on. When I asked what happened if we killed a lord together, Lee Kyo answered without a beat that whoever contributed most took the lion's share, and the rest split the remainder. Baekseol nodded, and I had no objection, since my strength meant I'd never be the one shorted under that rule. I told them it was settled, that the start was probably close, and that I was going back to prepare, then turned for my own ship. Behind me, I knew the two of them were trading a look that mixed helplessness with relief. Helpless that they'd never lead this trio with me towering over it, relieved that the trio had me in it at all, and reassured, after a real conversation, that I was decent enough to partner with for the long haul. Back on my own deck, Windsor came to meet me, looking me over with open worry, and only easing once she'd confirmed I wasn't hurt, and the warmth of being fussed over like that settled somewhere pleasant in my chest. I told her I was fine and we should get ready since I expected the fighting to kick off any moment, then strolled to the bow with my gaze fixed on the barrier. Windsor took up station beside me, Hwawa and Ha Rui perched on my shoulders, and we waited while the seconds bled away. The transparent wall began to ripple, thinning by degrees until it simply wasn't there, and my eyes went hard. Ahead of us, the demon domain ships started to move, black hulls and red patterns rolling forward row on row, giving off a strange pressure, and as they closed, I could hear shouting carry across the water. The spirit domain lords answered with a roar that seemed to shake the sky. Lee Kyo took the lead, and her boat surged out, Baekseol and I falling in close behind, and the whole spirit domain front began to move, tens of thousands of hulls setting off at once. On the sea, a long black and red line and a long white and blue line rushed at each other and met. An arrow flew, then two whole forests of arrows crossed in the air, then magic of every color slammed together, and then the fleets themselves crunched into one another. I'd layered myself in 4 shields before the first contact, a light shield, a fire shield, a golden shield, and my own. And I'd done the same for Windsor, Hwawa, and Ha Rui, because in a chaotic melee like this there is no such thing as too careful. I opened with a water arrow technique that dropped a man on the opposing boat in a single hit, and beside me Windsor's light arrow, Hwawa's fireball, Ha Rui's sharp arrow technique, and the commoner's volley all poured across at once. The ship facing us was simply staggered by the output, and its lord went down to a single exchange with Windsor, his death triggering one of the goddess's notifications in my ear that I had no spare attention for. I only had time to choose to destroy, and the wooden hull dissolved into white light, leaving a few corpses bobbing on the swell, and I was already swinging on to the next target. Almost every ship we touched folded in seconds, and the people around us began to notice. Some had clocked us from the start, since I was the only one with a tower ship, but the great battle had held their eyes until now, and now the sheer one-sidedness of our advance was impossible to look away from. Watching me tear through the fleet, a brown-haired, blue-eyed man on a level 6 demon domain wooden ship was in a foul mood. His name was Kajineo, and he frowned at how badly his side was bleeding. It cost him nothing personally right now, but as a top demon domain newcomer, he understood that a gutted demon domain would weaken the resources he'd one day build his territory inside, since the ceiling of any achievement is set by the ground beneath it. He pointed at my ship and ordered his people to attack, and the boat came about and bore down on me. Kajineo had clearly noted my hull outranked his, but it didn't rattle him, because a higher level ship isn't automatically a stronger one. And besides, he believed he could handle me and my group, and on top of that, he held a trump card. After I'd torn apart yet another ship, I caught his boat angling toward mine, and even though it was only a level 6 craft, I didn't relax, because a level 6 in the demon domain meant a frontrunner, the kind of lord who might be carrying something strange, and I had no intention of capsizing in a puddle. I thought for a moment, then set Little Blue under. I told it to slip beneath the enemy hull and hit it from below, since Little Blue's bulk was nearly the size of the wooden ship itself, and a surprise strike from the deep would throw the whole boat into chaos. Little Blue dove and swam toward the target, and Kajineo, knowing nothing of its existence, took out an item and pressed it into the hand of a short, thin man beside him. He told the man to wait for the opening, strike at the enemy lord, and kill in a single blow. The man swore he wouldn't miss. This was a hero of Kajineo's named Mocha, a stealth hunter, an assassin by trade, and Kajineo trusted him enough to nod once and look back at my tower ship with a cold little smile. I knew none of it, but Baekseol, fighting not far off, saw Mocha turn invisible after triggering some temporary flight item, and the instant she saw which way he was drifting, she understood Kajineo's plan and swung her boat toward me to get a warning out, while the gap between Kajineo and me was already closing fast. Hwawa noticed his approach and opened up, throwing a fireball straight at Kajineo, but it was swatted aside by another of his heroes, a rock race fighter named Soap Pan who carried a silver giant shield and very heavy defense, blocking the flame without giving ground. I looked at him and my eyes brightened, because unless that rock race hero was legendary, he had no business eating an attack like that without sliding back a step, and I doubted he was, which meant the shield itself was doing the work, though a hero who could wield it was clearly no low-level body. My whole side was built around offense and had nobody who could truly hold a line, and if I could pull this man over, I'd patch the one real hole in my roster. I'd never tried recruiting from a hostile force and had no idea whether it would take, but it was worth a try, so I gave the order that as long as they kept themselves safe, the others should avoid killing him. Windsor and the rest didn't know my reasoning, but that never stopped them from obeying, and Windsor opened with a light arrow that Seokpan's huge shield turned aside once more. Beside him, a woman in a green dress, an archer named Ruri, knocked a blue-green arrow and loosed it at me, then changed straight into a 3-star volley that put 3 more arrows in the air after the first. The 4 shafts split toward me and my 3 companions in sequence and came apart cleanly. The first canceled when it clashed with Harui's sharp arrow technique. The second met Windsor's light arrow. The third struck my water arrow technique, and the last reached me only to die against my shields without cracking even one, raising nothing but a ripple. Kajineo's and Ruri's faces went grim, since they hadn't expected to fail to break even my baseline defense. And Kajineo most of all started to sweat, because if my shields ate Mocha's strike too, he was in real trouble. He felt a flicker of regret, but he was already committed, and even if he wanted to run, I wouldn't have let him. So the only road left was the gamble, and a successful one would mean an enormous haul. At his order, his commoners began raining arrows at me, while Kajineo himself sat motionless, because his profession was priest and he had only healing skills with no attack at all. That fate had crushed him when he first drew it, since his dream had been to conquer the sea, and instead the system had handed him the role of a medic. My side returned fire without pause, water arrow technique and fireball and light arrow pouring across. And right then Kajineo's hull lurched and rocked violently as Little Blue rammed it from beneath. The collision knocked everyone on the enemy deck off balance, and I seized the heartbeat of chaos. Windsor led with an entangling spell, a light rope snapping out to pin Seokpan in place. Hwawa burned a fireball toward Ruri, and Harui did the most spectacular thing of all, muttering strange syllables until golden points kindled in the air above the enemy ranks. She swept her little staff, and the points fell all at once, a golden rain hammering down into Kajineo's commoners, and everybody it touched dropped dead or maimed in an instant. I was startled by how brutal the skill was, and I used the opening to lay a freezing spell on Kajineo himself, locking him down while Little Blue kept slamming the hull so nobody could find their footing. Then I saw Kajineo smile, and for a confused second I wondered whether something had come loose in his head, before my heart dropped and a warning instinct flared. And in the same instant Baekseol's cry reached me telling me to watch out. My peripheral vision caught her tense face, and before I could move a sharp blade was already in front of me, sliding through my shields like a knife through butter, splitting them one after another until, after the third broke, the figure behind it shimmered into view. It was Mocha. The blade in his hand was a blue-grade weapon engraved with a skill called Shield Break that dealt extra damage to defensive shields, usable only once a day, and he was spending that one use on me. It reached slowly, but it happened in a blink, fast enough that I could see the cruelty and the hunger raw in Mocha's eyes, and yet I was calm, startled but not panicked, and Mocha misread my stillness as terror, assuming I'd frozen because I'd been scared witless. Then a second blade appeared and drove straight into Mocha's neck. Blood sprang across my clothes, and as the strength bled out of his body, in his last moment Mocha saw a red-haired cat girl looking down at him with cold, flat eyes. I looked at Mocha's body, picked the blade out of his slackening hand, then hauled the corpse up and threw it overboard. The weapon appraised as the wind-breaking blade, a blue item that raised strength by 20%, and carried the engraved shield break which on use tripled armor penetration, for 1 strike a day. And no wonder my shields had peeled apart like wet paper. I handed it straight to Dark Moon, the only one of us truly suited to it, and the system rewarded me with a note that her affinity had risen by 5 points. She was clearly happy to hold it even if her face stayed flat, and folded back into my shadow. With that settled, I turned a cold stare on Kajineo, because I'd survived only because Dark Moon had been hiding as my backup, and I'd never stood closer to death in my life. Now that the danger had passed, a thin sweat had broken out across my back, and the dread caught up all at once. I told the others to kill Kajineo. Windsor struck without hesitation, Hwawa and Harui piling on in fury, since the near miss had frightened all of them, and now they wanted him dead and gone. Kajineo had believed his man would finish me, only to see a cat girl materialize from nowhere and gut his assassin. Every scheme wasted, and when he met Windsor's eyes, he shook all over with terror before the combined attacks landed, and his green-grade armor failed to save him. He died on the spot. I chose to destroy the wooden boat, and it came apart in a flash of white light, spilling everyone aboard into the sea, after which I had the few survivors hauled up, since from this moment they belonged to me. I came before Seokpan and asked him plainly whether he chose death or to follow me. When a lord dies, the heroes beneath him are freed, and their loyalty evaporates, and whether they avenge him comes down to affinity, since a high enough bond turns a slain lord's hero relentless rather than pliable. Kajineo had plainly never gotten on with his heroes, because Seokpan dropped to one knee without hesitation and said in a low, rough voice that he was willing to follow me. I turned to the surviving commoners and asked the same, and everyone bowed their head to show they'd come along, because there was nothing else to do, and Kajineo had never been worth dying for. Their loyalty was thin and freshly minted, but I trusted time would deepen it, and I nodded, satisfied, then turned to Baekseol's ship. I thanked her for the warning, since without it, Dark Moon might not have moved fast enough, and that fight had come down to a single second deciding whether I lived. Baekseol looked at me with a complicated expression, because while she'd known I'd never show my full strength any more than she'd show hers, she hadn't dreamed I was hiding a legendary hero, and a high-leveled one at that, though she smoothed her face back to normal quickly. She said I was welcome, that we had an agreement, and then, with a playful lilt, suggested that if I really wanted to thank her, I might give her something good. I knew she was half teasing, but I took it seriously because this counted as a life-saving favor and I had no wish to owe a debt that large. I thought, and my eyes lit on the answer, and a small ball appeared in my hand. It was a wood element talent mutation orb, a blue item that triggers a positive mutation in wood element talents with a small chance to upgrade them, limited by its grade to excellent talents and below. I picked it up a while back, and while it was useless to me, it was a perfect fit for Baekseol, whose talent was wood element affinity. I tossed it over and told her to use it as my thanks for the warning. Baekseol caught it, read the description, and her heart skipped because she'd assumed it was some trinket and instead it was genuinely valuable, useful to her specifically, and that very value made her unwilling to take it. As the saying runs, one shouldn't accept a reward without the merit to earn it, and a single warning wasn't worth a treasure like this. More than that, she read my intent exactly, that I was offering it because I didn't want to owe her, and Baekseol was no short-sighted woman. She could see I'd go far, and she had no interest in passing up the chance to have me owe her a favor, since a debt of gratitude is the hardest kind to repay. So she threw the orb straight back before I could refuse, saying the item was useful to her but her contribution didn't merit it, and that if I truly wanted to thank her, I should hold the orb until she found something suitable to exchange for it later. I caught it with a rueful twist of the mouth, since I could read her thinking plainly enough, but I couldn't very well force the gift on her. I told her fine, I'd keep it, and she could come trade whenever she liked. Baekseol smiled, because now there was a thread binding us, the kind that thickens into a real relationship through repeated dealings. All upside for her, and then she excused herself and threw her boat back into the fighting. I shook my head, since there was nothing to be done, though it wasn't a loss either, the whole exchange having shown me Baekseol was someone I could cooperate with on a deeper level. I told my people to keep moving and rejoin the battle. As time wore on, the fighting lost its clean shape, the spirit and demon domain lords tangling into a single churning mess. Kajineo's death as the local leader had dented the demon domain's morale here, and with me, Likio and Baekseol carving back and forth through their ranks on raw strength, the spirit domain's confidence swelled. They began rolling over the demon domain lords, hull after black and red hull dissolving into white light, the occasional surviving commoner left paddling in the swell, and every kind of attack and strange item flashed past in the chaos. I saw gourds that could freeze a ship in place once thrown, others that puffed white smoke to knock people unconscious, even items that turned a man into an animal. All of it hammered home a warning that the waters of this world ran far deeper than I'd assumed, and one careless step could drop me into a trap. Before long, the demon domain lords in my stretch couldn't hold against the four of us, and started to retreat, and naturally we chased, watching the black and red ships fall back toward the neighboring battlefields in a ragged arc that crashed into the surrounding fighting. The retreating lords merged into the demon domain forces nearby, but I didn't care and kept attacking, and the two battlefields began folding into one. I noticed that the spirit domain leader in this new battlefield commanded a level 6 wooden ship carrying as many as 50 commoners, all in leather armor with bows, and it surprised me, since I had no idea how anyone fed that many mouths. The surprise lasted only a moment, because everyone has their own fortune, and I'm not arrogant enough to think I'm the only lucky man at sea, any more than Baekseol's legendary hero was a fluke. The lord of that ship surprised me too, because at the moment he looked like a lion tribe orc, a leather bag of meter-long javelins slung across his back, hurling them with such force that almost every throw took a life. An invincible figure in his corner of the fight. He noticed us arrive, spared us a single glance, and went right back to slaughtering the demon domain lords in front of him. I had no intention of approaching just then, so I returned to my own hunting, since out here a single lord kill banked not only whitestone, but a ship core and a territory core, the bedrock of everything I meant to build. With my group added to the line, the balance tipped, and the side already losing crumbled faster, this time before they could even flee, because spirit domain ships were already streaming toward them from the flank, with demon domain hulls in pursuit. The fleeing demon domain lord and the fleeing spirit domain lord collided, the two clusters grinding past one another until both sides shot clear and reformed with their main forces, after which everyone paused to size up the new shape of things. Among the demon domain ships that had just given chase, I counted 3 level 6 craft, which I guessed were the opponents of the two teams Baekseol and I hadn't faced, and among the spirit domain lords who'd fled, one also had a level 6 ship, a male lord, one of our own top 10. Lee Kio's group had already pulled alongside them and were talking, so I steered in too, and as I closed the gap I caught that lord blaming Lee Kio, snarling that she dragged Baekseol and me away and gotten the rest of them routed. It was true enough as a factor, but it wasn't his place to throw the accusation. and Li Kyo wasn't about to swallow it, snapping that how she chose to ally was her own freedom, and that his failure was on his own weakness. He shouted back, telling her to ask the brothers around him if they agreed, and started working the fleeing crowd, who were already brimming with resentment from the rout, and now had a target, their bitterness sliding onto Li Kyo. Losers always reach for an excuse before they reach for a lesson. Li Kyo's face shifted, since she didn't dare court a mob, and Baekseol looked rattled too, because the three of us did carry some of the blame. The lord who could turn into a beast had reverted to his ordinary shape and was watching the spat with frank amusement. I knew it had to be shut down, or the reputation of all three of us would take a brutal hit, since everyone here was a standout newcomer lord with a small group at his back and real weight behind his words. So I cut in with a cold snort, saying anyone who chose to enter the two domains competition should have come prepared to die, and asking who walks into a slaughter expecting to lean on others. The crowd's faces shifted because none of them had counted on anyone else before entering, and the 10,000 who'd made it this far were no fools. They all knew relying on yourself beats relying on anyone. They'd only been steered for a moment, and my words made them waver. I ignored the lord whose expression was souring and got ahead of him, telling them not to let themselves be used, that he was spending them like pawns to reach his own ends. He retorted, exasperated, asking what goal he could possibly have and calling it an excuse. But I smiled and pointed out he'd shifted the subject, then laid it bare, that he wanted to use them to accuse us and seize leadership of the fleet. His expression cracked wide open, and I knew I'd guessed right, and once I'd said it, the crowd reacted, their gazes turning wary on him instead of us, and he understood his plan was dead. He'd wanted the leadership for the prestige and the future benefits, and now it was ruined, so he rounded on me, demanding what right I had to speak, and who I even was. He'd registered the unusual look of my towership, but irrationality had the better of him, and the words spilled out. I laughed, because the man was genuinely a bit slow, trying to use influence to suppress people without once weighing his own, and daring to try it on me. I said my name softly, Ha Shin, and asked whether I was qualified to speak now. The change in his face was immediate, and the chatter erupted. People muttering that it was actually the real big shot, that Li Kyo had allied with Ha Shen, and maybe their guesses had been right, wondering aloud how strong I was. Even the lord who'd been enjoying the show sobered, and looked at me seriously, then smiled and introduced himself as James, saying he'd heard of me for ages and was glad to finally meet me, and that he hoped we'd cooperate down the line. I had no reason to refuse the goodwill, so I nodded and said we'd work together if the chance came. James laughed and said he was curious how I'd resolve my personal issue, which baffled me, since I had no idea what he meant. He read my blank look and laughed harder, plainly not having expected I wouldn't even know my own nemesis on sight, unsure whether to call me thick-skinned or simply uninterested in my opponents, and landing on the latter. He tipped his chin toward a lord and said that man was Hagawa Hina. That stopped me short, because no wonder he'd called it a personal grudge, and I hadn't expected Hagawa Hina to actually look like that, which meant the man I'd seen in the arena that time had been hiding his face too. I studied him with open amusement, but had no plan to deal with him on the spot. The urgent matter was the demon domain, and acting now would betray a lack of strategic sense, whereas if I let him live a while longer to go kill demon domain lords, then killed him last, everything of his would fall into my hands. Right now, he was just a laborer working for me, and I genuinely hoped he'd rack up a big body count, since the more he harvested, the richer my eventual take. So I said magnanimously that now wasn't the time to settle personal scores, and that we could talk after we dealt with the demon domain. The others were stunned for a beat, then caught my drift and smiled faintly, since whatever the grudges, this was no moment for infighting. Hagawa Hina understood my thinking too, played dumb, and smiled, leaning on whatever item he held, plainly unsure who'd come out on top. James said we should ready ourselves and keep fighting. Li Kyo echoed that we'd still fight individually but cover one another, and Hagawa Hina put in quickly that no one was to stab an ally in the back while we fought the demon domain, clearly afraid I'd play dirty. Everyone looked at me, and I nodded and agreed that whoever ambushed an ally became everyone's enemy, which cost me nothing since I'd never planned to strike mid-battle anyway, and it would have wrecked my image. Hagawa Hina overrated himself because with his strength I barely paid him any attention. Baekseol said that if it was settled, we should start. Everyone answered together, and the boat surged toward the demon domain, which had begun moving at the same moment, plainly thinking exactly what we were thinking, to wipe out the other side. As the lines closed, James opened with the first throw, a javelin that killed an enemy outright, and the battle roared back to life. The leading demon domain lord opposite us kept loosing swarms of flying insects and suicide runs toward my group, palm-sized things shaped like bees, and a few peeled off to come at me, but Huawa's fireball erased them before they got close. Unable to land anything on us, that lord switched to picking off the weaker people nearby, since the rules only demanded the head count drop to a threshold, and never required killing the enemy leader, and I let him, because I wasn't about to play bodyguard to strangers. They'd chosen to enter, so they'd best be ready to die. While killing that demon domain lord would pay well, I'd rather drop several ordinary lords instead, each one a ship core and a territory core, with the odd surprise on top, especially since some had killed spirit domain lords of their own and were carrying extra cores for me to collect. I didn't think it greedy in the slightest. I only wanted more. Hagawahina was cutting his own swath through the field, and among so many lords his strength still stood out, but I left him alone, since Little Blue was already shadowing him underwater and I had no fear of him slipping away. As the fight ground on, more lords kept pouring in from the surrounding zones, so the battlefield didn't thin out. It swelled, though once everyone was inside the kill box, the numbers finally started to fall, and a great many lives had already ended. By my estimate, another hour would bring us to the ending threshold. Then, without warning, Little Blue sent me a danger signal from the deep, and I shouted for everyone to watch the sea. Windsor and the others snapped alert, and even Lee Kyo and Baekseol nearby grew warier. And barely had I finished speaking when the water heaved and water arrows erupted across the whole sky, raining out in every direction. Those shafts were as thick as 3 fingers, and many people died on the spot while some ships were punched clean through. Mine among them, an arrow piercing the hull and leaving a ragged wooden hole, though by luck it wasn't below the water line or I'd have started taking on water. The sudden assault froze the nearby fighting cold, every eye turning to the surface, where a figure rose out of the surging waves, 3 meters tall, gripping a gilded blue patterned trident, with a human torso, a snake's tail, and twin snake heads. One head had crimson eyes and a red mark on its brow, the other azure pupils and a black spot on its crown, the tongues flicking in and out, the stare poisonous. Everyone hit it with spirit eye at once, read the information and gasped, because the numbers were a nightmare. It was a crimson-eyed, azure-pupiled, twin-headed serpent, purple grade, level 14, with strength, agility, and defense all sitting around 110, carrying floating, water arrow technique, fire shield, fireball, water cage technique, and the area-melting fire cloud descent. The strongest of us, Windsor, broke past 80 strength only with her bonuses and trailed badly in every other stat. And this thing layered control, defense, and attack all in one kit. I shouted for everyone to stop hoarding their good items and use them now or lose the chance, because our only hope was to unite, or none of us would get out clean. I'd assumed this was a sealed competition arena, and I hadn't expected sea beasts to wade in, let alone monsters this far over the line, which felt like an execution order. The others grasped it too, and most steadied themselves after the first jolt and started attacking, though some bolted for the exit, only to find fresh sea beasts surfacing in the other zones, lashing at every ship around them. Now everyone understood the goddess had arranged this, since no coincidence stacks that neatly, and with nowhere to run, the whole field bent its attention to the monster in front of it. That was far easier said than done. Most attacks that struck the serpent did nothing, and the instant anything truly threatened it, it threw up a fire shield, then locked the threat down with water cage technique before answering with water arrows and fireballs, its tail sweeping it left and right with almost nobody able to stand against it. Then a lord hurled a small red net that ballooned in midair and dropped over the serpent, and though it thrashed, it couldn't tear free, and the lord crowed for everyone to attack fast, warning that his item was single use and would only hold for 5 minutes. Everyone seized the window and poured it on, my own people included, but even so we couldn't finish it, since most of what we threw splashed against its fire shield, and the faces around me went grim as the 5 minutes ran out and the serpent ripped loose. Both heads hissed in fury, and it raised its right hand and rattled off syllables until a cloud gathered overhead, reddening as it sank into the thickest knot of ships, and everyone it touched went up in red flame. A whole crowd wiped out in a heartbeat. The skill was monstrous, but mercifully, after loosing it the serpent began to pant, so it plainly couldn't spend that move freely and burned a great deal of mana to cast it. Right then Baekseol made her move, crushing a green bead in her fist that dissolved into green vapor she breathed in through nose and mouth, her face flushing crimson before she swept her staff and sent a thick emerald arrow wound with vines straight through the serpent's crimson-eyed head. Blood sprayed, and everyone watching was stunned that she'd actually destroyed one of its heads. The serpent roared in pain, its surviving head fixing on Baekseol with fury as its tail swung her way, and her expression changed. Not because it was coming for her, which she'd expected after pulling aggro, but because the head she'd pierced was already knitting itself back together, and she wondered whether the whole strike had been for nothing. I was surprised by her output, but more bothered by how impossibly hard this thing was to put down. So I took out a special item, a poison element bomb, hoping it would bite. I'd held it back because the serpent had been unwounded, and I'd feared the bomb wouldn't break its defense, leaving the poison no way to reach the blood. Now that one head had taken real damage, it was the moment, and I hoped the venom would ride its bloodstream and do serious harm, since I was running short on options. The problem was its speed, too high now for a clean throw, so I needed it pinned again, and I shouted, asking who could hold it for a moment, because I had a way. James and Hagawahina answered at the same instant that they would. Then both said in the same breath that they'd do it together. Because I was close to Baekseol, the two of them steered their boats in nearer, and I had no time to wonder why Hagawahina was suddenly so eager, though I wasn't worried, since Dark Moon and Little Blue were still in reserve. Once they'd closed, both produced an item. Hagawahina a red talisman and James a small collar, and James went first, flinging the collar so it shot up above the serpent's heads, expanded, descended, wrapped and shrank into a halo of light that locked the serpent in place. He shouted at me to hurry, and I threw the poison element bomb, which burst into clusters of purple mist that hissed where they met the serpent's flesh. It cried out in pain, and as it screamed, the mist poured into its nose and mouth, and it thrashed, spitting water arrows and fireballs around itself at random, until its gaze locked onto me. Pain had eaten its reason, and all it wanted now was to kill the one who'd hurt it, and feeling the poison spreading and knowing death was coming, it meant to drag me down with it. I watched it glare at me with hatred and surge in fast, and my heart sank because the thing hadn't died instantly. I shouted for it to stop and threw out a freezing spell, but it was too quick and the skill missed clean, and Windsor immediately layered a bewilder on it to scramble its judgment while Huahua, Harui, and the others scrambled to block its path. Lee Kyo shouted for Hagawa Hina to stop it, and he did unleash his item, smiling faintly, but he aimed it at me, the talisman turning to a streak of light that struck my body, and at once the surrounding air clamped down and crushed in until I couldn't move a muscle. I cursed inwardly that he'd gotten me after all, while Baek Seol and Lee Kyo both demanded furiously what he thought he was doing. James looked at him with plain disdain, and around us some shouted in anger while others openly gloated, since plenty of people wanted the first place holder gone, and even James, for all his contempt, wouldn't have objected if it had actually finished me. Hagawa Hina put on a wounded face and claimed he'd just been too nervous and slipped, that it hadn't been intentional, but the joy dancing in his eyes gave the lie away. Baek Seol and Lee Kyo were furious and helpless both, able only to throw control skills in the serpent's way. I'd been caught off guard, but I stayed calm under the shock, because I'd already watched the serpent's speed bleeding away as it weakened fast. With its mana spent, the serpent looked at my tower ship right in front of it, lashed the sea with its tail, hurled its whole body high into the air, and came down toward my deck. As it fell, Seokpan planted himself in front of me, with his huge shield raised, and the impact drove him straight down, his feet smashing through the deck and sinking into the wood. But he held. In the instant the serpent was blocked and delayed, the control skills from Windsor, Huahua, and Harui caught up and pinned it. And then Dark Moon appeared, swinging the wind-breaking blade and chaining Darkness Blade into Darkness Erosion straight into the serpent's other head. Even so, it managed one last swing of its weapon before it died, and the blow sent Dark Moon and me flying, both of us slamming into the inner wall of the stern and bringing up blood. And right then, outside the hole where I'd landed, two tentacles came whipping up out of the water and wrapped separately around Dark Moon and me. Windsor saw the tentacles whip up out of the red water and screamed at me to be careful, but the warning landed a beat too late, because Dark Moon and I were both already torn open from the earlier fight, and slow as cold honey. The tentacles wrapped us and started hauling us toward the rail. I had just enough sense left to throw a shield over myself the instant Windsor's voice reached me, so the worst of the grip slid off my own body, but Dark Moon had nothing defensive in her kit, and the tentacle closed around her like a fist on wet paper, grinding at wounds already too deep. Windsor spun a light rope into the air to pin the two limbs while Huahua and Harui dropped fresh shields over us, but those shells held only a breath before the tentacles tightened again, ripped clean through the light rope, and dragged us both off the deck. It happened too fast for anyone to keep up. They had only just swallowed the shock of Dark Moon gutting the crimson-eyed azure pupiled twin-headed serpent, the trump card I had been sitting on the whole competition, and now a second sea beast had surfaced and snatched the boss himself off his own tower ship. From where I dangled, I could read the calculation on their faces, the worry that this new thing was every bit as strong as the serpent, that the deck would run red again before noon. Then the serpent's corpse coughed up a purple item where it floated, and every worried face flipped to naked greed in a heartbeat. Most of these lords had never laid eyes on anything better than blue, so a purple drop pulled at them like a hook through the cheek, yet not one moved a finger toward it, because there was still a monster thrashing beside my hull. Baek Seol and Lee Kyo stared after me with real worry, which I noted and filed for later. Hagawa Hina, the little He Kingdom rat who called himself Little Sun, had felt his stomach drop the moment Dark Moon went to work on the serpent, since he had never guessed I was hiding a hero of that caliber. His plan from there had been to slink off and hole up until the timer ran out, and a smarter man would have done exactly that. Instead, the purple item sang to him. The greed squeezed his judgment flat, and he started inching toward the drop with murder warming back up behind his eyes. As the tentacle pulled me under the rail, my heart went to ice, and I genuinely wondered whether this was the end of the road, hauled overboard by a glorified squid, after surviving everything else. Then the grip simply let go. Dark Moon and I and the rest tumbled straight down into the water, and a hiss reached my ears before the sea went blood red. That gave me my first clean look at the thing, a purple-black octopus the size of a small house. My spirit eye laid it bare, and I almost laughed at my luck, because the readout marked it as a level 13 10-armed demon octopus. Strength 103, agility 101, defense 102, packing a binding spell, a magic eye, immense strength, and mutation. Another monster I had no business fighting, dropped in my lap, and I cursed out loud at the rotten quality of my draw. A blue shape rammed up through the murk before I finished swearing, Little Blue slamming into the octopus hard enough to make it flinch and let the rest of us drop. The relief lasted about a second. All 10 tentacles found my whale instead, sinking deep into Little Blue's flesh, and he started keening in a long, wretched note of pure pain. I hung there in the bloody water useless, watching my pet get crushed for buying me time, the thought hitting me hard that I owned far too few cards that could crack a crisis like this. Up above, the watchers had cheered when I went under, then read the octopus's stats off their own appraisal skills, and the cheer curdled into the same dread that had chewed them all morning, since here was a second nightmare with nobody to handle it. Windsor and the others were past dread and well into fury, feeling I was alive below the surface yet out of sight and dangling over the drop, one moment to the next, and that helplessness was eating them alive. Flame erupted off Huahua where she hovered above the deck, and her small body began to swell as she dropped into her martial god form for the second time I had ever seen. This time was different. The little staff in her hand winked out and reformed as a long red saber. Her fire-red hair streamed loose. Golden flame boiled around her shoulders. Red armor plated her, and a sigil burned across her brow. Her wings snapped wide and she shot down toward the octopus, hurling golden fireballs into its huge head. It felt the threat and let Little Blue go, swinging its magic eye toward her, and 2 black rays lanced out. She rolled clear of both, then 5 tentacles came whipping in to meet her instead. Huahua took the saber in both hands and sheared 1 tentacle off at a stroke, then knifed through the opening it left. The octopus, frightened now, fused the rest of its arms into 3 much thicker trunks and started hammering down at her. She kept slipping the blows, each miss cratering the sea and throwing up walls of water, and one swing caught my tower ship square and snapped a railing off like a dry twig. She chanted, and 3 ropes of fire wove out of empty air and lashed those trunks tight. Then she closed in for the kill. The thing felt its end coming, and one of its own tentacles detonated into a fine red mist that the other 2 drank up on the spot, tearing it free of her fire binding. By then it was too late, because she was nearly on top of it. The remaining 2 trunks split into a fan of smaller limbs and arched up into a round shield over the creature's head. Huahua pounded that shell with fireball after fireball until its defense sagged, then lit her saber with golden flame and drove into the weak point. Where her body met the octopus, it sizzled like a hot knife into a cream cake, and she punched clean through with almost no resistance. She landed on its skull, sank the blade in, and the flame began to crack off muffled detonations deep inside the brain. To be sure, she conjured 2 more sabers wrapped in red flame, buried them alongside the first, and set them off again. The 10-armed demon octopus came apart into 2 items hanging in the water, each glowing a faint blue. Not a sound came from the crowd as she gathered the 2 drops. Every one of them was stunned mute. None had imagined this little elf hid a face like that she could erase a beast which had terrified them all, without giving it room to fight back. And now their eyes slid to my other elf with the obvious question of whether Ha Rui had a second face too. Huahua ignored every staring lord, found Dark Moon and me slumped across Little Blue's back, and flew straight over, her body shrinking back down as she dropped onto my chest. I smiled up at her, because if she had not pulled the martial god form out a second time at the exact right second, I would have been finished for real. And I fished out the element gems I had on me and pressed them into her tired little hands. Huahua passed the 2 octopus drops to me, then took the gems and ate them with a happy little glow coming back into her. I pocketed the items without checking them, and let my expression go cold, because there was still the matter of Hagawahina, and that dog of a man was, as the saying went, like someone lighting a lamp in a toilet and spinning in circles, working overtime to find his own death. I had Little Blue surface, stepped back onto the tower ship, and ignored the wreckage since I would upgrade the whole ship the moment this was over. I crossed the deck, scooped up the purple drop, and turned to look at Hagawahina. Nobody around me made a sound. Even the ones who had thrown a fireball or a light arrow into the fight and had a fair claim to a share kept their mouths shut, because Huahua's performance had scared the speech right out of them. Hagawahina watched me come with a tight gray face and fear flooding his eyes. When he had seen Huahua change shape, he had felt his moment slipping and tried to peel away, only to find Li Kyo and Baek Seol blocking him, with James drifting into his escape lane on purpose. James, I understood at once, had done that to buy a scrap of goodwill, since he had finally accepted that I was nowhere near his weight class, and that getting close to me beat fighting me. Li Kyo and Baek Seol were a different story. They were my allies now, and although my endless bag of tricks unnerved them a little, they were far more pleased than spooked, since standing on the same deck as me meant a steady drip of benefits. So when they saw Hagawahina trying to slide off, they pinned him without a second thought, because letting a chance to deepen the tie slip past would have been plain stupid. Hagawahina knew he had burned every bridge with me, and that this would not end gently, but he had no intention of dying, and as long as a sliver of a chance remained, he would chase it. So he put on a calm front and told me he had only made a mistake just now, endangering me by accident, and that he was willing to make it right with compensation, both the mistake and the offer aimed at squeezing a pardon out of me. None of it moved me. Setting aside that it had been no accident, I had never had the faintest intention of letting him walk. I gave him a lazy smile and told him to kneel, kowtow 9 times with the floor ringing under his forehead, then hand over every single thing he had gained this trip, and that I might, just might, forgive him after that. His face went ugly at that. The kowtowing he could swallow, since face had never meant a thing to him, but handing over all his goods was a different hurt. He said nothing though, because he had finally grasped that he was no match for me, so he dropped to his knees and knocked his head against the deck 9 times, loud enough for the whole crowd to count. Then he stood and told me he had kowtowed, but had collected nothing this round on account of being hunted, and would make it up with something from his older stock. A card appeared in his palm and he flicked it across, an item quality enhancement card of blue grade, the kind that lifts an item's quality on use, though with a brutally low success rate on anything already blue or above. I had not expected this rat to be carrying something that good, and for most people it would have counted as a genuine treasure. I put the card away and still did not plan to release him, especially since the little weasel was even now trying to slip me a partial payment and hold back a core, which told me he still took me for a fool. I told him flatly that he was being dishonest, and that since he would not hand it all over willingly, I would take it off his corpse myself. His face twisted and he tried the only card he had left, telling me I had humiliated him and made him kowtow and he had done it, that I had demanded his goods and he had given them, and that if I killed him anyway I should fear the public outrage of everyone watching. I laughed at that, looked around the ring of lords, none of whom moved, the demon domain captain included, all silent as stones, and asked the crowd straight out whether anyone would object if I killed him. Dead silence answered me. Not one person spoke. Set aside that Hagawahina had thrown the first stone. My strength sat right there in front of them in the shape of 2 martial god-class elves and a night hunter, and nobody would risk an objection even if they nursed one. On top of that, this was the same Hagawahina who had tried to turn the whole crowd against Lee Kao and Baekseol barely an hour earlier, nearly tricking these very lords into a fight that would have gotten some of them killed. And here he was trying it again. As that memory caught up with them, several broke into a cold sweat and shot him venomous looks, and I felt the mood tip hard. Killing him and pocketing everything he owned was, the way I framed it, simply removing a pest on behalf of the people and following the will of heaven. And one could hardly fault a man for that, because if the good people grew disheartened, then who would bother being good in the future? Right on cue, the crowd erupted. Every voice tripped over the next to tell me they had no objection, that they had all seen how he tried to harm me first, that this villain was detestable, and they could testify to it. And would the boss please hurry up and act? From the heat in their faces, if their strength had been a touch higher, they would have torn him apart themselves. Hagawahina's face went green as he watched his last gambit collapse, baffled at how he had drawn the fury of the whole deck onto his own head. I gave him no room for another word, waved my hand, and told my people to deal with him. He was locked down flat-footed. Ha Rui's golden rain cut his clustered commoners to ribbons, and Huawa's fireball erased the single hero beside him. In a blink he stood alone, and before he could whimper a plea, Windsor sent him on his way with a light arrow. I looked at the commoners still treading water, and told them that anyone willing to follow me could swim over on their own, and every survivor struck out for my tower ship the instant the words left my mouth. Once they were all hauled aboard, I addressed the crowd properly, telling them I had always lived by the rule that I would not strike a man unless he struck me first, so none of them needed to fear I would slaughter the innocent at random, and that there might even be room to cooperate down the line. It was the usual diplomatic patter, and the usual agreeable murmur came back at me. As I finished, a notice reached everyone that the 2-domain competition could now be closed out, and I glanced toward the demon domain captain's corner to find a lot already opening teleport gates and bowing out. So much for any last scraps of loot. I told Baekseol and Lee Kao to reach me through the chat channel if anything came up, and the two nodded, opened their own gates, and vanished one after the other. The moment I stepped out of my own teleport gate, my whole body went loose. The competition had demanded constant awareness of every direction at once, and the strain had worn me down more than any single fight. Noon had crept up while we bled, so I sent everyone off to eat and rest, before we resumed fishing, and soon I was working through a meal Mori had laid out. While I ate, I opened the chat channel to catch up on the fallout. The regional board was a wall of the usual worship. The boss is a freak. We are simply not on his level. Glad I sat this one out so many died. Broken up by one lord crowing that he had bagged 3 enemy lords and a heap of resources. Someone flagged that the survival point ranking had shaken up hard. Another confirmed I had handled Hagawahina myself. And a third reported watching our own Danton get cut down by a demon domain lord, which drew a small chorus of surprise that Danton of all people had finally died. That demon domain lord was monstrously strong, several agreed, the kind only I could likely match, and the worship spun off from there into the usual unfathomable boss chorus. I pulled up the survival point ranking to see the damage. My own line sat first at 2,560, Baekseol second at 1,320, Lee Kao third at 1,210, Yi Baekpung came fourth at 1,111, James fifth at 1,097, Kaidi sixth at an even 1,000, and a name I did not recognize, Elizabeth, seventh at 999. Hagawahina and Danton were both gone, and so were the previous 8th and 9th, which had vaulted Katie from 10th to 6th. This Elizabeth I had never clocked before, which told me the field was larger and stranger than I tended to assume. I closed the list and turned to sorting the haul, which was fat. I had pulled 43 ship cores and 43 territory cores, even though I had personally killed only around 30 lords, the surplus coming from demon domain lords who had killed spirit domain lords and fed me the extra cores indirectly. Past the cores there was a drift of odds and ends, low-grade wall blueprints, low-grade arrow towers, a scatter of resource cards, most of it forgettable, but a few pieces made me sit up. The most useful by far were the 43 fishing rods, exactly what a man with a swollen roster of new commoners needed, since now none of those idle hands had to stay idle. 2 other items I had never seen. The first was a micro-purple crystal ore vein resource card, white grade, which on use grants a tiny purple crystal vein. A real boon for someone raising 2 elemental spirits even if the vein would surely be thin. The second was a green energy core, which automatically gathers ambient free energy and converts it into whatever energy is required. That one caught my interest, because if it could feed me electrical power, it might crack my ship's electricity problem. I tried it then and there and was let down, because it was nothing but a raw collector with no converter attached. So for now, all it could do was hoard energy I had no way to spend. I sighed and put it away. Out on the deck, a few lords were already fishing, so I handed a stack of rods to one man and told him to distribute them. That was when I noticed Seokpan sitting off to the side, the rock race tank who had surrendered to me, a hero I had collected but never appraised. I walked over, and he scrambled up to salute the instant he saw me. I told him there was no need for ceremony and asked whether his quarters had been sorted out, and he confirmed the Lord had arranged it. I nodded and told him these new commoners would be his responsibility going forward, then asked if that posed any problem, since my plan was to hand the management of ordinary residents off entirely. From here out, Windsor and the others and I would stop babysitting the rank and file and serve as the core leadership of the territory, parceling the day-to-day out to other heroes and concerning ourselves only with managing those heroes well. Seokpan said there was no problem at all, Lord, and I gave a satisfied grunt and finally ran my spirit eye over him. The readout pleased me. Seokpan came back at fine quality, a step above the ordinary I had assumed. Level 6, Strength 30, Agility 29, Defense 32 before gear bonuses. Wisdom 30, 300 mana, a shield warrior hero carrying stone skin art. Great shield art, and gigantification wielding a green lapis lazuli shield. The unexpected quality was a small gift, but what really caught my eye was his loyalty at 83, with affinity not far behind. The loyalty of any hero I had not summoned myself would never start at full, but 83 was a fine base and would climb with time. As I kept conquering, I would keep subduing heroes this way, since leaning on summoning alone was never going to scale, and imperfect loyalty was no concern so long as they would not bolt at the first hard wind, provided I kept the high posts staffed by heroes I had summoned. I waved Seokpan off to his duties and turned to the 3 drops from the 2 purple sea beasts, hoping they paid out since I had nearly died earning them. The first was an incomplete magic eye skill stone, permanent, dropped by the 10-armed demon octopus, damaged by some prior misfortunes so that all it retained was the power to read information. I was delighted regardless. Even stripped of its offense, an appraisal stone solved a real headache, since I could have Dark Moon and the others learn it. And Windsor had complained more than once that without an identification skill, her teams had a harder time hunting alone than when I rode along. With this stone, Windsor and the rest could lead their own crews from here on, and since it was permanent, every hero under me could learn it in turn. I sprawled on the deck chair laughing over the find, and that was when Windsor and Dark Moon wandered over, Hwawa and Harui having already gone off to drill. Windsor settled into the chair beside mine and asked what had me so pleased. I gave them the short version and handed the stone across, and the 2, surprised and pleased, learned it without hesitation. I moved on to the second drop, a broken 10-armed demon octopus beast core, blue, holding the residual energy of the beast, and good for a wide spread of uses. I sat there a little stunned, because this was effectively a magic core, the very thing I had hunted for after every sea beast kill early on and never found, until I gave up looking. The only frustration was the timing, since I had spent 2 whole weeks gutting low-grade sea beasts and the drop rate had to be miserable for me to surface one only now. At least I had confirmed beast cores were real and obtainable. The third drop was a Fire Cloud Descent skill stone, purple, granting the skill on use, with the learning requirement of a fire element profession. I was happy at first read and then immediately conflicted, because Hwawa could obviously learn it as it stood, yet if I ran my 100 transformations over it, I might bump it to gold, with the risk that it would turn into a skill stone she could not use at all. It was a real dilemma, and I shelved it to decide that night. I pushed the matter out of my head and turned to the ship, still battered with a snapped railing, which I could hardly dive for the afternoon hunt. So I upgraded it straight off, and the whole craft came back fresh as new. The readout showed it at level 2 now, 50 meters by 15, 3 floors. The first floor held the kitchen, a large living room, a restroom, the observation deck, the fishing corridor, the mast, and the helm. The second floor held the core cabin, 2 large living rooms, 4 small ones, a warehouse, and a restroom. The new third floor added a kitchen, 2 large living rooms, 4 small ones, water storage, a restaurant, its power coming from multi-ore linkage propulsion. The technology slate read, ship drainage at level 3, ship thermal energy at level 2, ship automation at level 1, multi-ore linkage propulsion at level 3, and ship diving at a weakened level 3, with diving as its special ability. The new floor had bought me the restaurant and the water storage, and I was glad of both. I opened the technology interface and got to work. First I pushed the diving technology to level 4, then bumped the propulsion technology to level 5, and finally unlocked the complete version of the diving technology and built it as a level 1 complete setup. My white stone was flush this time, and after watching that octopus shred my railing, I had decided a diving system with a shield was no luxury. The complete version held for only an hour at a stretch, but an hour of protected diving could swing a desperate moment my way. With that settled, I went down to the small living room where the upgradable fixtures lived, because my swollen head count meant the seawater converter and the flower producer could no longer keep pace. I took the seawater converter up to level 10 in one shot, lifting its output to 1,280 liters a day, enough that I could finally take a bath, and a good thing the new water storage existed, or hoarding that much would have been its own problem. Then I ran the flower producer up to level 7, reaching 200 kilograms a day, plenty for my whole crew, with enough surplus that I might cook something fine and sell it, since white flour was a rarity now. When the spending stopped, I had just under 13,000 white stone left, so I kept the change and dumped the rest into cloth and cotton wadding, because winter prep never sleeps. Then I fired up the diving function and took the crew hunting beneath the waves, staying submerged 4 to 5 hours with the upgrades, an hour of it now under the full shield. Barely 2 hours into the hunt, the goddess Chiyomo cut in with an announcement, declaring the weekly survival points settlement that everyone would draw a basic reward by their points, and that the top 10 should choose their bonus point rewards. I left Windsor and the others hunting and ducked into a random room to claim mine. The basic reward was a packet of water and food I scarcely glanced at, since neither meant much to me anymore, and I went straight to the bonus, which offered 3 items in a choice of 1. The first option was a merfolk talisman, purple, described flatly as an identification token of the merfolk and nothing more, which made me frown at how little it told me. The second was a large fertile soil resource card, purple, which on use grants my territory a stretch of rich earth where anything planted yields far more than ordinary ground. And that one was genuinely strong. The third was an Earth Origin ginseng seed, purple, that grows into the rare spirit treasure Earth Origin green flower when planted, and my eyes went wide, because I already held the seed of the Earth Origin mother ginseng, and a second purple heavenly treasure herb to pair with it was no small thing. The Earth Origin seed obviously raised raw stats, but a seed is a seed, with no telling how long it would take to bear, so it might do nothing for a long stretch beyond padding my foundation. The fertile soil, by contrast, would pay off the instant I had ground a plant, multiplying every crop and feeding more mouths, and I knew well that a territory grows on bodies, and bodies grow on food. Then there was the merfolk talisman, which I simply could not read, and I sat there genuinely torn between the 3. In the end, I chose the merfolk talisman, against my own instincts. I did not understand it, which was exactly why I wanted to gamble on it. And even a dud I could run through 100 transformations and salvage as a gold item. I pocketed it and hunted alongside Windsor and the others until our time ran out. The sky had dimmed to dusk when we surfaced, and I went straight inside. The level 2 core cabin had grown a third room, which I gave to Huawa and Ha Rui. After dinner, I cleared the white stone off the money tree, dropped onto the sofa, and got ready for the day's 100 transformations. But first I skimmed the trading list Wang Mok had forwarded. The battle had pushed some higher grade items onto the market, though high grade did not mean good. Things like fancy spoons and chopsticks, and I bought up nearly all of them anyway since they were cheap and made perfect fodder for transforming later. A glance at my accounts showed roughly 7,000 white stone in hand, having pulled over 5,000 from the afternoon's hunt alone. I was about to begin transforming when a friend message stopped me, and I opened it puzzled to find Bake Seol. The first thing in the thread was an image, and beneath it a single line asking whether I needed this. I opened the image and read a talent quality enhancement orb, blue, which carries a chance to improve a talent depending on the user's existing grade, and my heart jumped, because I wanted that thing badly. I fired back that it was exactly what I needed and offered to trade her my wood element talent mutation orb for it, since I already understood what she was after. Why she preferred my mutation orb to using this herself, whether to deepen the tie or because she valued the mutation orb more, I neither knew nor cared. So long as the trade went through, I listed the mutation orb on the trade channel earmarked for her, and the swap closed in seconds, leaving the blue talent quality enhancement orb in my hand. I did not dare run my 100 transformations over this one, because if it shifted into anything else, I would have to go find a corner and weep, so I used it straight, nerves prickling, praying it would not fail. Then I pulled up my own information, and the result knocked the breath out of me, because my talent now read 100 transformations, legendary, able to drive any item through a positive random change, able to specify the change type at will, with the resulting quality guaranteed to climb 1 full grade 3 times a day. I laughed out loud at being a legendary grade hero in my own right now. The part about specifying the change type lit my eyes up, because it meant I could take a humble cup and name equipment to get equipment, or name blueprint to get a blueprint. The dice loaded in my favor at last. I could not keep the grin off my face, since the upgrade gutted most of the old randomness that had burned me so many times. The thought struck me that if my talent had climbed once, it could climb again, and if it kept climbing, it might one day let me transform anything into precisely what I wanted, which would make me flatly unbeatable. The one catch was that specifying type was not the same as specifying item, and the talent quality enhancement orb belonged to the special item category, so even if I named the special type, the odds of coughing one up would stay miserable, since special items were too numerous. Then I drew out the water cup I had bought today, the highest grade thing in my cart at blue quality, and specified blueprint type before running the 100 transformations, choosing blueprints because they held real value, and a blueprint duly appeared in my hand to read. It was a 100 Spirits Pavilion construction blueprint. Purple, a building that summons creatures of every race with a chance of pulling heroes, and keeps a steady trickle of commoners flowing into the territory. Raising it called for 1,000 wood, 500 stone, 200 refined iron, 100 refined copper, and 10 gems each of fire, water, and earth. I felt mixed about it. Calling it useful, I could already pull commoners with civilian summoning cards, which were never hard to come by. Calling it useless, it still carried a chance at heroes, though I knew full well that chance was thin as paper. It was the textbook chicken rib, too bland to relish and too wasteful to toss, so I filed it to build later, since a purple building was a purple building. Next, I took out the broken 10-armed demon octopus beast core, blue, specified the same type, and transformed it, and out came a 10-armed demon octopus beast core at purple. The same energy reservoir bumped a full grade, which set me into thought. 2 lessons sat in that experiment. First, beast cores were their own distinct category, so going forward I could specify the beast core type to fish for cores. Though below high quality, it would never be worth a precious transformation. Second, even with a legendary talent, specifying the same type as the source made the result overwhelmingly likely to be a related item, useful for steering future transforms. Filing both away, I sent Windsor to call Huahua and Harui over, held the purple beast core out, and asked Huahua whether she could use it, on the logic that since she and Harui had first shown up as pets, it ought to do something for one of them. But both elves shook their heads. So I gave all the elemental gems I had on hand to the 2 of them, ran the rest of the off-type gems through the element converter into purple crystals, and left the core cabin to test the beast core on Little Blue. Outside, the whole ship was cutting forward under Li Rook's command, with Little Blue swimming out ahead of the bow. I called my whale over, held up the 10-armed demon octopus beast core, and asked whether it was any use to him. Little Blue let out a happy cry, so I tossed the core across, and he opened his mouth and swallowed it whole. I patted his huge head and went back to the core cabin for the last item, the Fire Cloud Descent skill stone I had been agonizing over. I specified its type and ran the 100 transformations, and let out a long breath when it resolved into a Fire Meteor Fall skill stone, gold, learnable by anyone with a fire element or earth element profession. Mercifully, it had not warped into a skill stone nobody could touch. This one was going to Huahua, the first gold grade skill stone I had ever pulled, so once she learned it, slipped into her martial god form, and let it loose, the result would surely be devastating. And I could not wait to watch it. She had not fully awakened yet, but her drilling had nudged the odds of triggering the form a little higher, the sort of thing that could not be forced, only worked at while nature took its course. I got up and went to bed, and the one waiting was Dark Moon, since Windsor had gone to rest in the new room, and I understood perfectly well what that arrangement was meant to convey. Morning came, and I opened my eyes to find Dark Moon already up. I rose, and not long after I had watched Mori had the meal laid out. I sat at the table and watched Dark Moon and Windsor come out of the inner room together. And when Dark Moon's eyes met mine, her deliberately cold face flushed scarlet. I chuckled, while Windsor shot me a mock glare, having clearly already been told everything. After eating, I handed the resource fishing rod to Windsor for the day's 3 pulls, and once she had gone, I settled on the sofa to dig into technology, while Mori, with nothing to do, drifted over, knelt, and began kneading my legs. I let her be because I had a real problem to crack, the matter of electricity. So I searched the keyword directly. The result was the ship electrical technology, which once lit would give the tower ship the conditions to run on electrical power. I had stumbled onto it before and failed to light it, so I tried again, and the prompt came up the same as last time, stating that a level 3 tower ship could light it. The condition had not been met before, and it seemed the prompt only shifted its wording once the requirement was nearly within reach. I nodded, since at my current rate of earning it would take only a handful of days to push the ship to level 3 and unlock it, and I closed the panel. I was on my way out when Chianmo broke in with a fresh announcement, congratulating everyone on surviving 2 full weeks, and promising that we would now come to understand this world more deeply, with a wish for a pleasant journey, and that single paragraph left me genuinely puzzled. A bare congratulation was not Chiamo's style. Every previous time the goddess had spoken, it had carried real weight, so I turned the line over and over, and the phrase about understanding this world more deeply was what snagged me. I remembered what the Jimson mountain turtle had told me long ago, that Shanmo restricted the movements of the various races for the sole purpose of slowly tempering novice lords like us into something stronger. The natural reading now was that Xianmo had lifted those restrictions, though probably only a partial lifting, which meant that from here on my journey would likely start running me into people of other races. The thought left me uneasy, and, beneath the unease, eager, because I genuinely wanted to see this world's true face for once, and the prospect made my chest tighten with something close to excitement. I calmed myself and walked out onto the deck, where the day had turned gloomy, no sun reaching through, dark clouds packed thick overhead, the sea stretching boundless beneath them in a way that pressed down on the chest. I went to the deck chair cluster and patted Dark Moon, who rose to make room, then leaned back and pulled her down onto my lap, my hand finding her cat ears, and her body shivered before she sank into me. Windsor watched the whole performance, said nothing, and merely rolled her eyes, and I chuckled and started in on a glass of juice, savoring the rare quiet. It did not hold long. Little Blue let out a cry not far off, and I turned to see his whole body heaving, the skin splitting open as fresh wounds tore wide and blood streamed out. The three of us were on our feet at once, certain some enemy had ambushed him, but after a tense stretch, no other sea beast surfaced, and my mind clicked into place. The beast core I had fed him the night before had to be the cause, so I told Windsor and Dark Moon it was nothing, that Little Blue was simply evolving, and the reassurance settled them, though Windsor still wove a steady healing over the whale to dull the pain. The wound slowly knitted shut as the crying tapered off, and where the bloody gashes had been, there now ran lines of red pattern across his hide, lending him a faintly demonic cast. I opened his information. Little Blue, now a deep-sea demon whale at purple, 30 meters long, level 7, strength 52, agility 48, defense 48, his skills now ram, tear, thunder sword, giant wave, and a new one, transformation. The name had shifted from deep sea giant whale to deep sea demon whale, his stats had ticked up, and the beast core had plainly done him good. I waited until the evolution had settled before I asked what transformation did. Little Blue swayed side to side, and under our startled eyes his body shrank fast, until he was barely a meter or two long, then darted around the water leaping clear of the surface, looking thoroughly pleased with himself, which struck me as both funny and exasperating, since it told me his mental age was not running especially high. I asked whether shrinking was the whole of it, since at that scale the skill looked pointless, and Little Blue stopped, swayed again, and this time his body swelled instead, growing until he hit a full 60 meters, double his natural length, longer now than my own tower ship, which widened my eyes. That was a real card after all, since sheer size carries plenty of advantages when the moment calls for it. I patted his head and sat back down, and just then a commenter handed me a blueprint, which turned out to be for yet another reclining chair. A little deflating, but I built it and Dark Moon promptly stretched out on it. At that same moment, Windsor reeled something up and handed me 3 items she had caught that morning. The first was a Starlight Magic Staff at green grade that lifts the caster's mana by 10%, and I decided to run my 100 transformations over it that night, and if it stayed a staff, pass it to Huahua, my key training project and current trump in the team. The second was a diving respirator blueprint at green grade for a respirator that lets a person move freely through the ocean, requiring 5 wood, 10 plastic, 3 iron blocks, and 2 copper blocks. It did not look especially useful, and the recipe calling for wood of all things confused me, so I decided to transform it that night under the blueprint type and see whether anything better fell out. The last item was a medium magic horn horse herd at blue grade, a resource card that yields magic horn horses on use, good for hauling or even as cavalry, and I sat straight up, since blue grade meant I could pull a purple item out of it, and I tucked it away pleased. With nothing else pressing before the afternoon hunt, I opened the chat channel, glancing first at the regional board, where the chatter was thin and the headcount had dropped under 3,000. That stopped me cold. It meant that in 2 weeks, 70% of the people in my region had already died. Brutal beyond what I had assumed, and if other regions had bled at the same rate, then the total across this world had to be astronomical. Some part of me hoped the slaughter elsewhere had run gentler than mine. I switched to the World Channel, where someone had asked what this week's disaster would be. That drew the usual bravado about blocking soldiers with soldiers, and damming water with earth, a jab about brains being decorative organs, and a non sequitur craving for hot pot pig brain that made me smile despite myself. The whole exchange a sign that plenty of people could no longer stomach the monotony of the food. Then a single message dropped into the channel, like a stone into still water, and threw up 1,000 ripples, someone shouting that he thought he had spotted an island. The board exploded. Half told him he was hallucinating a giant sea beast into a landmass. Half were desperate to know if it was real, and one confessed he had half believed Shionno was lying about islands existing at all. The spotter announced he was going in for a closer look, and asked the brothers to wish him luck, which they did in a flood. The replies kept refreshing with no further word, so he had clearly set off to investigate. The news startled me too, because I had assumed I would be first to make landfall, only for someone else to stumble onto an island ahead of me. By my reckoning, the first person to land and found a territory would draw a massive reward and open a gap over everyone who founded theirs later. So a thread of anxiety wound through me, as I sat glued to the channel. After a stretch, the spotter came back, crowing that it really was an island and that he was the luckiest man alive, which set off a fresh chorus of envy, people demanding to know why no island had ever crossed their path, and my own heart sank a little watching it. They pressed him to found his territory and describe what one even looked like, several noting he had beaten even me to it, while another cutting that this came down to pure luck. The man promised he would found it right then, and the board lit up with people clamoring for a description, asking whether founding took this long, accusing him of hoarding the news. After 2 or 3 minutes of silence, the channel grew restless, and I was restless along with them, because I urgently wanted that founding information myself. When the spotter finally spoke again, it was to wail that he was crying, that he could not found a territory, which the board met with open disbelief, accusing him of inventing an excuse to keep the details to himself, demanding he stop stalling and tell them. He swore he was not lying, and the doubt kept pouring in. I had assumed at first too that he was angling to hide the information, but after watching so long, his words rang sincere, not the cadence of a man spinning a lie, and it really did seem he simply could not found a territory there. So I sent my own message into the flood, asking plainly what the situation was and why he could not build an island. And although my line got buried under the churn, almost the moment I sent it, a few sharp-eyed people caught it. Word spread fast, one calling for everyone to stop sending messages because the boss was speaking, another asking why he had missed it, a third snapping at the rest to quit shoving the message down. Ever since the two-domain competition closed, my standing among the spirit domain lords had climbed to something close to towering, and within a minute, the traffic thinned. I sent my question a second time and added a line asking everyone to hold off and let the man speak. Somewhere out there, a young lord in a long robe, 5 companions sitting around him on the grass, shot to his feet so suddenly he startled the people beside him, blurting that the boss was talking to him, and scrambled to reply. He insisted everything he had said was true, sounding wronged, and I told him I believed him, and only wanted the specifics. So he laid it out. He had taken out his territory core and declared his intent to found a territory, and gotten no response beyond Xianmo's prompt that the conditions were not met, and wandering the island to try several spots had drawn the same prompt every time, which he could not explain. My mind raced over it. Not meeting the conditions to found a territory, what would produce that? One possibility was that the island was already occupied, since only one territory could exist per island. Another was that the island was missing some necessary element, leaving it short of the requirements. Beyond those two, I could not guess. I laid out both for him and told him to explore carefully and stay alert, since he might turn up something unexpected, and he answered that he understood and would post the moment he had news. Rather than reply, I sent him a friend request, and Yu Pyong, as his name read, accepted instantly in obvious excitement. I told him I suspected this island was exactly the deeper understanding of the world Chiyomo had hinted at that morning, that he should roam it, and might find something but to be careful, and he promised to notify me the second anything turned up. He never raised the matter of a reward, and I understood the calculation. Asking for one would reduce us to a single transaction, whereas staying quiet might let him build a standing connection with me, and the long-term payoff beat any one-time bounty. Still, I told him plainly that he should notify me if he found anything, and I would give him a fitting reward, because if you want the horse to run, you have to feed it grass. He shot back that I was looking down on him, which puzzled me, then declared that working for me was his honor, and that I should never mention rewards again because it insulted him. Delivered with a shameless earnestness that left me dumbfounded, since this Yu Pyong was plainly his own breed of oddball. I had no idea how to handle that sort of person, so I told him to go explore quickly, and he swore he would guarantee the mission, then turned to his companions and told them to start sweeping the island and stay sharp for traps. Yu Pyong and his crew hacked through the undergrowth and pressed inward, taking the occasional attack from monster beasts native to the island, though those were weak enough that even Yu Pyong at level 5 could handle one alone, let alone with 5 at his side. One an ordinary hero. I closed the channel and turned the situation over, more and more convinced this island was Qianmo's chosen method of making us understand the world, and that people would keep hitting the same scenario from here on. That nobody had yet founded a territory steadied me a little, since I wanted to be the first. A thread of worry stayed with me though. The fear that the island I had been steering toward by the map might turn out just as unfoundable, and I sighed at finding myself completely helpless, since all I could do was hold my course and deal with it if and when I hit one. When Windsor heard the sigh and asked what was wrong, Dark Moon glancing over too, I just shook my head and said it was nothing. I stopped chewing on it, drank a glass of something, lay back, and let my eyes close, drifting off without meaning to, until Windsor woke me at noon, the gloomy weather fooling me into thinking it was night before I registered the hour. I ate lunch, fired up the diving technology, and started the day's hunt. Out on the island, meanwhile, Yu Pyong had spent the whole morning exploring and turned up nothing beyond a few wild fruits, so the 6 of them sat down to eat. A wild boar roasted on the ground beside some fruit and bread, and the sight of the sizzling oily meat had them swallowing hard, since they had choked down nothing but fish for so long they were sick of it. They wolfed the boar down and resumed the search. 2 hours later, one of his men burst out of the tall grass, stared ahead, and yelled for the Lord because they had found something. Yu Pyong shoved through the grass and stopped short at the scene before him. A dilapidated little city stood there, part stone wall and part wooden wall, a dried riverbed circling it like a moat, small animals scattering through the empty channel at the shouting, the ground inside packed hard from old foot traffic so the weeds grew short and sparse. He nearly came apart with excitement, hollering that he was rich, since a small city like that had to be packed with good things, then reined himself in and told his people to move out and watch the surroundings, and the six started toward it. Yu Pyong crossed the broken bridge over the dry channel and entered the city, greeted first by ruined residential buildings and weeds everywhere. After clearing a path and killing a few low-level monsters, he reached a second city wall, mostly intact and built entirely of bluestone, and passed through its gate. The buildings inside stood in better shape, and though those lining the road were damaged, you could still faintly read the prosperity this place had once held. They ducked into several at random and turned up nothing of value, so he pushed on to the center, where the buildings rose taller and abandoned their uniform style for distinct character apiece, the castle at the heart pulling all their eyes. Yu Pyong walked straight in, and the castle proved enormous, its courtyard planted with all manner of trees including some bearing fruit, though he left the fruit alone since it was not going anywhere and made a circuit of the grounds first. In the southeast corner he found a cluster of buildings, most already ruined, but two still standing whole, and he hurried over. One was made of bluestone with bows and arrows hung around the walls, and as he neared it a prompt surfaced telling him he had discovered a complete troop nest, asking whether he wished to destroy it, and noting a chance to obtain the nest afterward. He burst out laughing, because until now he had owned exactly one white militia troop nest, and here was another, no, two, since a second stood right beside it, and even at only a chance he was hardly going to leave them. He ordered his men to tear the first building down, and once it was demolished a green light flashed, and an archer troop nest at green grade floated up, which delighted him so his grin nearly split his face. He threw his people at the second building, and this time the nest came of blue, a lancer troop nest that summons lancers, a powerful cavalry unit. He stood there stunned, rubbing his eyes, gabbling that he could not be dreaming as he snatched it up, grinning so foolishly that his subordinates half wondered if their lord had taken ill, until one asked whether they were going to keep exploring and snapped him back. He pocketed the nest and told them to miss nothing and leave only when every building had been picked over, since two nests had already dropped before he had even seen the heart of the castle, and he split the six into two groups. Meanwhile, I had wrapped my own days hunting without a mishap, pulling close to 6,000 white stone along with a clutch of white-grade building blueprints I gave no thought to, and simply collected. Stretched on the lounge chair, I pulled up my own information and found the afternoon of fighting had carried me to level 6, each basic attribute climbing 5 points, which meant I no longer needed to throttle my leveling now that I sat at legendary quality. I read my line over. Level 6 with 2 of 600 experience banked, strength 32, before bonuses, agility 32, defense 31, wisdom 30, and 300 mana. I was an ice element messenger hero carrying spirit eye, water arrow technique, shield, and freezing spell, equipped with a green staff, a green ring, and green sea star armor, my talent now 100 transformations at legendary and my title still empty. Beyond my own gains, Ha Rui had leveled 2, a gold elemental spirit at level 6, strength 55, agility 52, defense 56. Her skills were the hardened gold body, golden shield, sharp arrow technique, golden cage technique, and golden rain, her loyalty and affinity both at a perfect 100, surely the fruit of the element gems and purple crystal I had fed her. What disappointed me was that Hua had not leveled at all, despite holding more gems, and the only reason I could land on was that her ongoing awakening was burning through energy faster than the gems could supply. That evening I ate dinner up on the deck, barbecue, and cracked 2 bottles of red wine, and as I ate, I messaged Yu Pyong to ask whether he had found anything. He was at his own dinner, working through some edible meat his people had scavenged out of the Lord Castle's underground cold storage, cooked into a fine meal by the chef among his subordinates, though one seat at that table sat empty. The thought of it weighed on him, because once they had pushed into the castle proper, they had met 2 puppets he had taken for ordinary statues, and a single careless moment had cost him a man. After putting the puppets down, he had recovered the castle's territory core and some gems from the warehouse, though he was unsure what any of it was good for, and when my message landed, he answered quickly that there was an abandoned lord territory on the island. That surprised me, genuinely unexpected, and I told him to lay it all out, so he recounted the whole of it from the broken bridge to the warehouse. When he had finished, I found myself puzzled. By his own account, the inner city wall still stood intact, so how had the place fallen into such ruin? And even if some attacker had cracked it, why leave the territory core behind? And why had the warehouse gone entirely untouched? Which meant whoever struck it had come not to occupy the place, but only to destroy. A thought surfaced then, and crowded everything else out, the question of whether disasters might come even after a territory was founded. Whether it was only when Qianmo herself moved to test the lords, that you would see a lord killed but his goods left unplundered. The longer I turned it over, the more likely it felt, though even if I had it exactly right, there was nothing I could do, and I could only meet whatever came as it came. I set the tangle aside and kept talking with Yu Pyong. asking how many element gems he had and whether he was selling, since those gems were near useless to most people right now, and I had 2 elemental spirits to feed. He paused over the message, plainly working out what use the gems held and why I wanted them, and arrived not at understanding their use but at understanding they were useless to him for now, since whether he would survive long enough to find a territory was an open question. Trading them made far more sense, Whitestone in hand, giving him more confidence whether he was upgrading his boat or weathering a disaster. He told me he had 176 gems, mostly water and earth, which left me a touch let down, since I had pictured him raiding a full lord's warehouse for far more. Still, it beat nothing, and dwarfed the rough 20 I had scraped off the trade channel, where the item was pitifully scarce. After this round of islands, many more lords would surely turn up territories and I could buy in bulk, but that could wait a few days, since for now nobody else had even found an island. I told him I would take them all and asked him to name a price, and he answered honestly that he did not understand their value, which caught me off guard since I had no firm grasp of the market price either. I had bought them at 20 whitestone each last time, and a glance at the trade channel told me I was the only one buying, so my price effectively was the market, and I offered 20 per gem and asked whether he could accept. He had naturally tested a single gem in his own store and found it ran around 18 whitestone, and the only reason he claimed not to know the value was that he did not know what others were paying, so once a quick check showed him I was the lone buyer, he agreed at once. I told him to list them and I would buy them straight through, and the moment he hung all 176 on the channel I cleared them in a single purchase. He watched his items vanish and over 3,000 whitestone bloom in their place, marveling that the boss was truly rich to drop that much so cleanly. Seeing how decisively I moved gave Yu Pyong a sudden urge to sell his troop nests too, but he caught himself and decided to hold them, since with Whitestone in hand he could keep the nests for the day he found a real island, and needed manpower waiting. Even if a crisis caught him on the road he could sell them then, knowing the top-ranked lords would all snap up that kind of item, so he would never lack a buyer. I told him it was fine and asked him to sell me any element gems he turned up since I was buying long-term, and he agreed, then tactfully said he would stop bothering me and that I should rest soon. I closed the chat window and opened the world channel, where Yu Pyong was already holding court, boasting that there was a lord territory on this island, and that was exactly why nobody could found one. The board pressed him on whether he had run into a live lord, and he clarified that it was an abandoned territory he had looted for good stuff. That drew the predictable scoffing about what an abandoned place could hold, until he posted pictures of his 2 troop nests and a scatter of other items, and the channel flipped to wonder and envy. People calling him rich, marveling at an actual blue troop nest, wailing about when they would ever find an island of their own. Yu Pyong, riding high, announced that he had once held element gems too but had sold them all to me. Not many, only enough to fetch 3,500 white stone. The board howled. One declared that watching him strike rich was more unbearable than being killed, while another noted they had seen me buying element gems since the day before at 20 white stone each. A third admitted they had no idea what the item did but that the boss kept hoovering it up, and a fourth told everyone to wake up because it might serve me without serving them. Then someone asked Yu Pyong whether he had my friend slot, and he answered with naked pride that of course he did, since in his eyes that slot was worth far more than the white stone, a foothold beneath a great tree that meant he would never again fret about how to develop. I watched him shatter away, smiled, and said nothing, since he was indirectly advertising my standing buy order on element gems, which suited me fine, and then I closed the panel. With dinner finished, I first ran the leftover element gems through the converter, then headed back to the core cabin, Windsor taking the night with me while Dark Moon went off to another room, since I had wanted both to stay but Dark Moon had flatly refused, and I had given way. As for Hwawa and Harui, the two were still out on the deck, with Hwawa, my walking charging treasure, being put to use yet again. I settled on the sofa to spend the day's 100 transformations, while Windsor stretched out on the bed paging through a book, one of several volumes the day's hunt had coughed up. They had surprised me when they dropped, since I had hoped for useful knowledge and found nothing but stories, of some small entertainment value and little else. I reached out and took out the first item. The first thing the panel showed me was a Starlight Magic Staff, green quality, the kind that bumps a caster's mana up by 1/10. The moment I specified the equipment type, and let 100 transformations work on it, the name flipped over to Moonlight Magic Staff, blue now, with the bonus doubled. I was relieved it was still a staff and hadn't reinvented itself into some useless trinket, because that would have been my luck. I decided it would go to Hwawa tomorrow, and turned to the second thing I had pulled out of the sea that day, a diving respirator blueprint that wanted wood and plastic and iron and copper to make a little breathing rig for swimming around in the open water. That one was fine, but the third item was the one that made me sit up, because it was an underwater breathing technology blueprint. Blue, the sort of thing that activates a ship-wide system and lets the whole crew breathe down there. Not so long ago I had actually wanted to chase an underwater breathing talent, until I learned how stingy the talent slots were and gave up the idea as a waste of something I could never get back. And now here it was, the same capability, only better, handed to me sideways and dressed up as nothing more than a blue blueprint. I had clearly overestimated that talent badly if a system this good only rated blue. I used it on the spot, opened the technology interface, and watched underwater breathing slot in and light up as active. Building it cost me 2,000 white stone without hesitation, and at level 1 it would let 5 people breathe underwater for a full hour, which was plenty for whatever surprise the sea decided to throw at me. The upgrade wanted 4,000 more, so I left it alone, because what mattered right now was hauling the tower ship up to level 3 and switching on the electrical technology, not stacking hours I had no use for yet. I put everything away and reached for the last item of the night. It was a medium magic horn horse herd, a resource card promising mounts I could use for hauling or even for cavalry someday. And I thought about it for a second before specifying the special item type and letting the talent run. What came back was a mother-child stone, a thing for sending messages across distance, and I knew immediately how much that mattered. Once I had a real territory under my feet, a stone like this would let me sit safe behind my own walls and still command heroes I had sent out with troops to fight. The mother stone was a touch larger, clear and glassy in my palm, and the 7 smaller child stones each held one color of the rainbow. I tucked the set away, decided there was nothing left worth fussing over, and went to bed, pulling Windsor against me and letting my hands wander where they pleased. And Windsor set her book aside and met me halfway. Afterward, she lay against my chest a little breathless, tracing slow circles on my skin with one slender finger while I kissed her forehead and told her to rest, and she hummed that she would, and we both closed our eyes. My last thought before sleep was a daydream about the island I kept hoping to find, and how I would lay out my territory once I did. We opened our eyes at the same moment the next morning, traded a smile, lay tangled together a while longer, then got up. After breakfast, the whole group drifted out to the deck and stretched across the lounge chairs, and the cold had real teeth today, noticeably sharper than the day before. So I opened the trading channel and bought just enough clothing to cover my people. I was done hoarding. The whole point now was to stockpile white stone for the ship upgrade and the technology, and if I kept dumping money into cloth and cotton and the market crashed underneath me, I would genuinely have something to cry about. I already had 18,000 white stone of resources sitting in the warehouse, and if I could move them, the profit would be sweet. I handed cotton fleece jackets to Windsor and Dark Moon, kept one for myself, and the warmth made the morning bearable. I passed the resource fishing rod to Windsor, ducked into the warehouse for the purple crystal I had cooked up overnight by feeding gems into the element converter, then wandered over to where Hwawa and Harui were still grinding their skills. Both of them cheered the second they saw me and came flying, so I scooped them up and carried them back to my chair. I set the purple crystal on my stomach and let the two of them perch there, one on each side, nibbling away with their tiny faces lit up. Watching them eat like that, I caught myself smiling like a doting fool and stroking their little heads. Then I opened the chat channel and tossed out that I seemed to have run into an island myself, though I had no idea whether I could build a territory on it. The answers came back resigned, that several people had hit islands the night before, and not one of them could plant a territory. And somebody floated the theory that Shiano herself was steering the islands to keep us off the ones that mattered. Another voice said even those islands were worth it for the loot, and a third mentioned that somebody had died exploring an island the day before, which apparently took higher-level monsters than the explorer had brought along. So islands were starting to surface for everyone now. I had no idea what kind I would draw, but I was looking forward to the haul. Then my chat box flickered with a message from Ye Bakepung, and I had to think for a second about why she was reaching out. She had been gathering dust in my friend list since Lee Kyo introduced us, both of us being top 10 names with nothing to lose by connecting. If she hadn't pinged me, I might have forgotten she was even there. She said she had noticed I was collecting gems and had a fair pile herself, and asked whether I wanted them. I told her I would take as many as she had, because gems were the more the better situation for me, useful for training Hwawa and Harui and for the construction my profession temple would eventually demand. She asked whether 20 white stone apiece was fair, and I agreed. What I did not know was that Ye Bakpung understood perfectly well the gems were worth more than that, even with the open market only paying 18, and that the price sat that low purely because nobody had a real use for them yet. She figured that once territories started going up, gems would be worth a great deal more, but right now they were dead weight to her, so she would rather turn them into white stone she could spend on her diving technology and on leveling fast. I told her the price was fair to both of us and that I would pay on delivery, and she said straight out that she had 732 element gems on hand. I read that number, assumed I had misread it, and confirmed it twice, because that many was staggering, and I only had a little over 10,000 white stone to my name. It was awkward, so I asked whether she would mind telling me where so many gems had come from, adding that she could keep it to herself with no harm done. She said there was nothing secret about it, that she had run into an island and found the gems sitting in a Lord's Territory warehouse, a cave territory at that, the sort she might have missed entirely if her luck had been slightly worse. I asked whether she meant underground, and she said yes, that she had gone down and met a swarm of goblins, weak ones, and she sent a photo to prove it. I opened it and looked at a knot of scrawny green goblins, short and half-dressed, swinging mining picks and a few wooden shields, charging with furious little faces, mound-shaped buildings behind them, and the suggestion of a castle in the far back. I joked that they looked distinctive and told her we would trade that night because I was short on funds at the moment. She agreed, a little surprised, because she had expected me to buy a slice of 700 gems, and instead I had taken all of them, which by her math meant nearly 15,000 white stone. Even with me claiming to be short, she suspected I was simply hiding my hand and could pay right then, since how much could a person really earn in a day? And she herself only pulled 600 or 700 white stone from 2 hours of hunting. If she had known what was actually in my head, she would have been speechless. Because the truth was I really did not have enough on hand and I could pull 1,000 white stone out of the sea in a single hour. I had 4 legendary subordinates under me plus myself, 5 hunters of that caliber, so harvesting a little more than other people felt entirely reasonable to me. I closed the interface, still chewing on what she had said. The territory she stumbled into was a cave lord's. According to what the Jimson Mountain Turtle had told me, those were the leavings of an underground race lord who had failed the trial, just as the one Yu Pyong had found was the wreckage of a human lord who had failed his. I had no idea what race left behind the territories other people were finding, or what kind would be waiting for me. Windsor's voice pulled me out of it as she handed me my catch, and I checked the first piece, a fishing platform blueprint, a life building that promised my territory a practical bit of entertainment in exchange for wood and stone.